Welcome this folks on BevCam and who is here at this point. I know people will be coming in. My name is Scott House and I'm Chair of Finance and Property. And as we have done with our previous meetings, we will open for questions to all members of the council after members of the Finance Subcommittee have an opportunity as well to ask questions first. Given who we have here this evening, I think what I'd like to do is welcome our City Solicitor Stephanie Williams, and we'll start with the Solicitor's Office. And we're waiting for a podium which may show up at some point, but it's all set up there. No, that's good. That's fine.
Okay.
That works fine. Thank you. So, good evening, Ms. Williams.
Good evening, councilors. It's hard to believe that we're here again.
Once more, another year.
So, the law department acts as attorneys for the city and performs risk management and basically acts to protect the city's interest in all legal matters. And on a day-to-day basis, acts as legal advisors to all city officials and employees in connection with their official duties. I think most of you are pretty familiar with what we do, and because of this year's structure with the digital budget book, most of our information about services and operations and the structure of the department is outlined in the book. I'm happy to go into more detail or answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you very much. I would also like to say that I'll point out who we have from the administration, but we have a smattering of folks here who are coming from other meetings, and after we're done with Solicitor Williams and the Solicitor's Office, I'll introduce and say hello to everyone on behalf of the council. So thank you for that. The digital budget book is very helpful in sort of laying out the for anyone who might want to look online to see a full explanation of what your office does and the various different budget items for it. So I will go directly to questions from members of the subcommittee if we have any. Councilor St. Hilaire.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Solicitor.
Good evening.
Had a question. So we had a bunch of big issues last year, the charter review, the national grid, and we had consultants brought in.
Right.
Where in the budget does that money come from? Is that your budget or is that somewhere else? Yeah.
So the outside counsel, Ray Miari's firm, was paid for out of our outside counsel budget, and that's a very good example of the type of situation for which we would use that line item. And then I believe, I know that the Collins Foundation was hired through the clerk's office budget.
Okay. And I guess looking at the upcoming fiscal year, are there any
Correct.
issues like that you're projecting, or are they sort of
Yeah, it's a good question. Right now, I'm not aware of a specific project that will be coming forward that will require that kind of specialized work. I know we are going to be doing ordinance review. The law department has already started it and actually gone through, I think, most of the ordinance, with the exception of zoning and planning board regulations, and likely will be prepared on its own to discuss that with the council. So right now, I'm not anticipating it, but that's the thing about the law department, right? Like,
it seems like that's the one variable you have, right?
right. The one known is that there are sort of some unknowns and things that we can't always predict. So
You budget for that? Is it sort of
Well,
are you
so that's
projecting
a
like
good
a
question.
middling year, or how do you project?
can you say that again?
I guess how do you budget for that?
So if you look at sort of the history of the originally budgeted amounts, it's been pretty consistent over the years. I think, we've always been around like the 66,000 for outside counsel, and it's up to 135 now for litigation. And I've been working with those numbers for years. They may have
The
been a
actuals
little
may have
bit.
come in
No,
different?
the actuals are the actuals. I'm talking about what's proposed for this year and what was proposed for FY23. The actuals are a little bit different because sometimes there are intra-departmental transfers and sometimes funds have been encumbered and carried over. So, for example, in FY20, the budgeted amount for outside counsel was $65,000. Budgeted amount in FY21 was $60,000.
Those years you came under.
Yeah, budgeted amount was 66.3, and this year it's 66.3. And with respect to litigation, in 2020 it was 135, 2021 was 120, and I think the last 3 years have been, actually FY22 was 190 because we had the Bass River litigation that we were planning for, so we increased the amount we budgeted. And then this year, FY23 is $135,000 and FY24 is $135,000. So I'm very familiar with these numbers. And so, when I go into a fiscal year, we look forward throughout the year. If I know there are going to be negotiations coming up, I know that I want to be very, very careful about how we use the outside counsel budget because I know maybe 7 months into the fiscal year, we're going to start negotiating, right? So I want to kind of guard that very closely. But I keep a very close eye on it from month to month and have to be very judicious about making decisions to hire outside counsel. And we typically only do it if it's a matter that requires somebody who basically does it every day, highly specialized lawyer in a particular area of law, or in some cases where a piece of litigation has become so big and all-consuming that it really takes away from the in-house
Thing, yeah.
Yes. And so in those cases, with this Bass River litigation being an example, we hired outside counsel.
Go ahead.
And I guess maybe for Mr. Ailes, if we were to run into a situation where the budget isn't enough, where would we look to draw additional resources from? Historically, does that come from reserve for unforeseen or?
Yeah, it really depends on the timing. If something were to happen earlier in the fiscal year, yeah, we would likely look to the reserve for unforeseen because so much of the fiscal year has yet to be determined. But if it's later in the fiscal year, we may have some savings in some other areas of spending within other departments or the unforeseen, or in extreme cases as kind of a plan C, we could even go to free cash to pull some money in if we had to.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate that. Good.
I had the same questions as Councilor St. Hilaire, so I've had them answered. Thank you.
Councilor Bowen, do you have a question?
Yes, I had two quick questions. One, just to follow up on Councilor St. Hilaire's line. Do we have a plan for negotiations coming up again shortly?
Well, the contract runs through June 30th of 2024, all the contracts. So typically, by the end of the calendar year, we start to talk with unions about setting up initial meetings. So I would anticipate in the second half of the fiscal year, we will be into negotiations with all 9 city unions. Mm-hmm. And we do use outside labor counsel for that purpose.
Thank you. And then my other question was on the, so you mentioned the ordinance review, sort of some of the work has already happened that would be in your department's
Right.
Area. The charter review is nearly complete. Do you have more work to do on your side or updates on where that stands?
Sure. I saw your email earlier today. As you know, it was filed, and it's been referred to the Joint Committee on Municipalities and Regional Government. And we have been expecting that we're going to hear about the scheduling of their hearing on it, any day, really. They're very aware that some of the questions are going to the ballot this fall, and so there's time sensitivity so that the clerk's office can publish the ballots. And we've been assured that this will happen in time for that, in time for the clerk's office to be able to publish. So that's where it stands. I don't anticipate that we'll need a consultant to complete the work.
Thank you. And just so on that timeline, are we expecting movement before the end of this fiscal year, or that would be?
At this point, it's June 8th, and we haven't heard about the date of the hearing, so I think that would be ambitious. But you never know, and we're ready to go. And it's my understanding, at least as of right now, that they're not expecting testimony from anybody. But, you know, somebody would go.
Any other questions for Solicitor Williams? Seeing none, thank you very much. I just want to take a moment to acknowledge your Assistant City Solicitors, Beth Oldmixon and Jesse Dole. Thank you very much for being here. Appreciate your time.
Yes, thank you. They're a great team. And I will say, I do love the digital book. The photograph's gone, but there was a photograph there of our bookshelf in the law department next to, in the goals.
There it is.
In the goals section of FY '24, and I think one of our goals has to be to dust the bookshelves. They aren't actually white. So,
I think you need to maybe put something under one end of the bookcase as
That's
well
true
to
too,
get it
lot.
level. Yeah.
and everything we do now is online, which is why you don't see fingerprints on the shelves, but
I hope you can find money in your budget to sort of make it so it's flat.
yeah, we'll work on that. All right, well, thank you. Thank you all very much.
Thank
Probably
you.
under the
Thank you.
renovation, you know? Back to the
You
renovation.
just rotate the picture.
Yeah, really. So before we proceed, we were running a little late, so I wanted to quickly jump into opening the meeting. I want to just acknowledge we have Mayor Cahill with us this evening and his Chief of Staff, Jocelyn Ruel-Kursker. We also have Finance Director Brian Ailes and Assistant Finance Director Amit Chiani. We have Chief O'Connor from the Fire Department. We have Peter Dickman from the Harbor Masters Authority. We have Mark Foster from Emergency Management. We have Matt Lipinski from Animal Control. And I think we have Arena Keefe from the Mayor's Office as our Sustainability Director. And I think I've got everyone. So welcome, everyone. It's a pleasure to have you here this evening. I think the Mayor, if you would like to go next. Maybe some of your department heads may have schedule conflicts, but if not, and I see the
Yeah,
podium
here comes the podium.
the podium's arrived in the nick of time.
Perfect.
Super confused from his budget presentation.
Sorry. We're all set up for the podium to give testimony.
Beware, it's wet. It's been outside. Thank you, Kim.
Good to
Excuse me, there's a lot to do here tonight, so I don't think I need to make any real comments. I think we can go right to questions, and I know you may have some for me, it may have some for other members of our department.
Sure. I think what might be helpful would be, you have a number of different positions on on the mayor's staff, constituent director, chief of staff, sustainability director, and so forth. Maybe you could, through the course of our discussions, try to hit some information about each one of the various members of your staff as we go through the questions.
Okay,
So, members of the subcommittee, any questions for Mayor Cahill of the?
Can I perhaps
Yes,
answer Councilor Bowen's question from an earlier hearing?
Yeah, please.
And that would be to ask Ms. Keefe to come up. In looking at the line, the green initiative line in the public services budget, I spoke the other night saying that Ms. Keefe had allotted for each dollar there. She actually hasn't. We have more in that line than is identified yet, which is also a good thing. But in building that line, Ms. Keefe articulated several different needs. So why don't I let her walk through that with you?
Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Mayor, and good evening, everybody. So the majority of my funding is in the Green Initiatives line that's in the Public Services Department budget, which I'm assuming that's where your question originated. So we do have grant matches that we already know we're going to commit in fiscal year '24. We're working on grant applications right now. Those matches would be about $50,000 already. We're applying for about $250,000 in grant funds this summer to support 2 resilience projects, one for a comprehensive plan for resilience at Lynch Park, and another to advance the Aubert Park erosion control project and move through permitting. So that's right there, a big chunk of the funds. And then we're also saving money toward the workplace charging stations and fleet electrification. Those grants typically require a 40% match from the community. We have website licenses for Resilient Together. We, to date, have been subsidizing a bit of the mattress recycling fee for residents. If you may recall that as of November of last year, there was a new policy that required for all of us communities to kind of scramble to find a solution for mattress recycling. Instead of having our residents pay the $50 fee, where we started off by offering a $20 subsidy for each mattress that's recycled. So we're building that in for next year as well. And we also have just more funds set aside for future grant applications and for some education projects, for example, to support the geothermal project at the library. We want to have some kind of gallery to be able to kind of showcase the process both for the public and for other municipalities that are considering projects like that. Thanks.
Thank you. While Ms. Keefe is at the podium, maybe we can just, if there are any questions directly related to the sustainability work that she's doing in the city, this would be an opportune time to weigh in. It appears you are doing a great job and everyone's fine. Oh, I'm sorry, over here.
Brendan first.
Councilor Sweeney.
Thank you, Mr.
Go ahead.
Chairman.
See you there.
And definitely agree with Councilor Houseman. You've certainly been active. And so you mentioned a few grants that the department is, or your office in particular, is kind of spearheading across a few different departments, focused on some work at Aubert and Lynch Park. Are there any other major projects that you've been undertaking this past year that are worth flagging now, maybe that are either close to completion or just starting off, that really will progress as this coming fiscal year?
Sure, we have one that's wrapping up in the next 30 days, so that'll be before the end of this fiscal year, which is the Bass River Resilience Study. So we invite you to attend the second and last public meeting next Tuesday for that. We do have, as you are aware, lots of municipal building projects coming up in the next fiscal year, and typically our role would be in helping to arrange and coordinate and work out the utility incentives for those building projects. That would be for City Hall, the Youth Center, and for the library as well. And then we have our community aggregation program that we're optimistic will be passed soon in the next few months, so that we can roll out this program community-wide starting in the fall. And we've been eyeing waste policy for a while now. We have a few steps to take before we bring any new policy in front of you. I know that there were some recycling questions that came up in previous budget discussions, and our kind of approach there would be to have Republic, our hauler, come directly in front of you and give a presentation on how recycling is working out, what our recycling market is in Massachusetts, and just give you some reassurance that yes, it's happening and yes, it's working, and kind of take that as step one, where step two would then be to think about passing some new policy on private haulers to require them to do some recycling as well. So those are some, I guess, broader categories. And then we do have some kind of continuing projects around solar. We'll be advancing the solar project at the police station, continuing to electrify our fleet, both at our school and at our other city departments, including our inspections and police station as well, to name a few.
No, that's helpful, thank you. And I appreciate you walking through some of the work that you guys have done, and then some
Mr.
bigger
Counselor,
projects.
if I could just add to that, do you mind if I just add?
Hey, please.
Go ahead.
Very modest. So Ms. Keefe was point on the multi-site solar project, which is a 4-ish year-long project involving numerous departments, all of whom had real roles and put significant time in. But Ms. Keefe, from the day she started, coming up on 3 years ago, took over project management for that project and did a tremendous job. She's heavily and integrally involved in the library HVAC project. As she said, the two upcoming building projects, this and the youth center, also integrally involved with, as I said, many departments, purchasing, DPS, legal, financial. But there's in some ways not an end to the work in sustainability. It just does keep going. There's always more. And she does an amazing job. Thanks.
Thank you, Mayor Cahill. And I do have a couple
Sure,
of
go
follow-up
ahead.
questions to that. To the point the mayor made about some of the work that you do that cuts across multiple departments, the mayor mentioned your office has been in existence for just about 3 years, so a newer office. You had the newest assistant sustainability position brought on this past year. I know there's been some turnover there, but maybe in a two-part question here, could you talk about how that work has functioned, the workflow between yourself and some of these other departments, and then also the impact, although it was a short tenure of the person that held the position, the impact of the assistant sustainability director, and where, if the city is to fill that position going forward, where that impact would most be felt in some of these projects that you mentioned for the upcoming fiscal year.
Sure. So as Mayor Cahill had mentioned, a lot of the projects really cross multiple departments. A lot of the work that I do is with the Department of Public Utility Services. So thinking about any kind of electric vehicle charging infrastructure in the ground, any trees, the grounds and forestry folks have been really amenable to sharing communications around the work they're doing for pollinator planting promotion and tree plantings. Obviously, they're the lead on all the work that happens on the ground. Thinking about bike infrastructure as one that kind of crosses public services and planning and sustainability and others. I know the engineering department is reviving the stormwater committee, so I'll be represented there as well. For the planning department, Darlene and I will be, Ms. Wynn and I will be meeting monthly from here on out to coordinate on a lot of just kind of random projects that pop up over the course of a month, including trying to resolve some mobility challenges and promote just less reliance on single occupancy vehicles around town. A lot of buildings and development work. So what are the ordinances or the policies that we would need to either look to adopt, such as a new building code that's green, or things like requiring tree pits of certain dimensions or requiring pre-wiring for electric vehicles? Are there bike rooms and bike parking as these kind of developer proposals come up? So there's a lot of overlap there, and I'm grateful to have leaders in each one of these departments that really care about sustainability. Makes my job a little easier. To your other question about staffing, so I certainly feel it now that our Sustainability and Resilience Project Manager is no longer with us, so we will be reposting that position. He, for the most part, had been the lead on the Bass River Resilience Study. And as we repost this position, the next person coming in would likely be the lead on managing the next two resilience projects. He also was the kind of manager for the interim season for the community garden at Cole Street. This is the last season that site will be available to residents. And then after this growing season, the Moraine Farm site will be opened up and expanded. So that will be something too that I think this position would work with the trustees of reservations to build out.
Okay, thank you. And I guess to follow up, it sounds like this position is still necessary on that end in terms of dividing up the handful of projects, more than a handful, it sounds like, that your office has taken on. Just as we as a council consider, fortunately, we're fortunate to have had a grant that has helped seed the funding for this position, but obviously consider to what the future of the office will look like. But thank you for taking the time to answer my questions here and for all of the important work that you are doing on behalf of the city.
Yes, please, Councilor Feldman.
I have, thank you. I have one quick question, and that is, we had spoken previously, I appreciate also the information about recycling and programs and buildings, and because I know that's been recycling at apartment buildings and has been a really big question I've gotten from constituents in those apartment buildings, and they're concerned. And we had spoken, I believe, last year about how there was an additional inspectional services person that was going to be hired, and that person, there was a position that was going to be interdepartmental, and I want to enforce some of these policies with recycling and some of the things that already are on the books, but just we don't have enough people to take care of them. And I was wondering if you are finding you're able to utilize that position, or how much progress have we made since we've added that position to the budget last year have we made in that department?
I think we will be able to. That position is currently vacant. It was filled for a few months. This was a full-time position in the engineering department, and half of the position's time was intended to be spent on engineering compliance, and then half of the rest of the time was to be spent on waste and sort of compliance with our waste bans and our practices for hauling and putting your bins out properly on the curb. And they were really impactful at the time, and spent a lot of time tagging bins outside and had that kind of on-the-ground presence that we haven't been able to dedicate the resources to so far.
Fingers crossed.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I have a few questions. First, any update on where we stand with the grant for this position's salary in terms of whether it's continuing, part of the budget, so forth?
So just to recap, right, we got the same anonymous donor who funded Ms. Keith's position and is funding it through mid-October. And then this coming fiscal year after mid-October, we'll be responsible for 100% of Ms. Keith's position, offered us $300,000, $100,000 a year for 3 years, to cover the cost of the assistant position and whatever we don't spend on that position for us to use in our electrification efforts, our fleet electrification specifically. So we had the position filled for close on to 6 months, and my intent is to go back to the donor and ask, when we do fill the position, will we kind of look at the time frame as having told since the person left and starting back up? Idea being, again, I'm not sure exactly how long Brad was in the position, but call it 6 months, right? Then what our ask to the donor will be is to say, can we start 6 months and 1 day when we get the new person in? So that'll just move the dates. And as you remember, the first year, the donation would be covering 80% of the cost of the position. Second year, 60, third year, 40. Same model as was used when the person donated for Arena's position. That helpful?
Well, yeah, I guess I haven't had a chance to quickly look at notwithstanding what Ms. Keefe said earlier, to look at the line items. So is there a continuing grant for her position as well as what you just described for the assistant position?
So when we hired Ms. Keefe, we hired her in around about mid-October of that fiscal year. And so her third year in the position will conclude as of this coming mid-October. So currently, 40% of the costs of her position are being paid by the donor, the donation. That'll continue in this fiscal year up through October 15. From then on, and it does show, I think Mr. Eales broke that out in the budget book.
Okay. So here on out, this position is funded entirely by the general fund of the city budget?
Yep.
Okay, thank you. That's my question on that. Ms. Keefe, I have enjoyed the pleasure of your participation in the Clean Energy Advisory Committee. I know the committee finds your participation there very valuable and very helpful. And so I just want to sort of give a shout out to your participation in that particular committee. In particular, the updates that you have provided the committee sort of on when they meet monthly with updates on the status of city projects. So that's been a very valuable part of those committee meetings. And then my last question has to do with your reference to work at Oak Park and Lynch Park. Could you elaborate a little bit more about what the resilience program and funding is that you're looking at for those two projects?
Sure. So for Lynch Park, this will be starting a new, by the way, thank you also for your comments about the CEAC. I know they very much appreciate having your presence almost every meeting, Councilor Houseman, so thank you for attending. And so Lynch Park will be a new project. If you've been there recently and even walked around the perimeter of the park, you'd probably see that there's some park benches even that have been picked up and moved through during intense storms. You may have seen pictures floating around on Facebook of the floods that reach almost all the way up to the stage at the Shell. So it'd really be looking at the risk and the vulnerability of that park due to the impacts of climate change, sea level rise, more intense and frequent storms, and how can we, in particular, manage drainage better so that we're not compromising the existing seawall. And then the Aubert Park project would be a continuation. We've had a feasibility study completed, or a feasibility study on resilience options, and that was kind of a preliminary, what's going on, is what's causing this erosion, what can we do to stabilize the banks and make sure that we're going to continue to have a park in 20, 50 years. So that will be bringing the project through the permitting phase, and after that, we'll be seeking additional funds to do construction of those interventions to stabilize the bank.
Thank you.
And those are both state grant sources from the Coastal Zone Management.
Okay, I know that the state has a new 2.0 version of the Municipal Vulnerability Program. Are any of the grants that you referred to that are being applied for partly through that to address either Aubert or Lynch Park?
We believe that the CZM grants are a better fit for both of those projects. They'll allow us to take a better look at sea level or sea walls in addition to just nature-based solutions. We are using MVP funds right now for the Bass River project and won't be doing so again for this cycle.
Okay, great, thank you. Those are all my questions. Anyone else for Ms. Keefe? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Other questions for the mayor? I'll start off asking you a little bit about Main Streets. I know that Main Streets has reached out to the council regarding getting additional support from the city over and above what perhaps we've had funded in the past. And I wonder if you could just speak to the role you see Main Streets as a partner with the city, and then how that relates to whatever funding is in this budget and their request for additional funds.
Mm-hmm. Sure. So Main Streets has been really a long-term valuable and valued partner for all we do, right? We all know and work with Main Streets. Main Streets is a partner with the city in the cultural district, as well as the Beverly Arts District. Main Streets pulls off a couple of wonderful events each year, the Arts Fest and block parties. And Main Streets does a lot of work working with downtown businesses, working with downtown landlords, working to try to promote and attract the right mix of businesses. As a nonprofit, they do a lot of amazing work in and for our downtown and really supporting our local downtown economy. They also are able to inspire and harness thousands and thousands of hours of volunteer help on various subcommittees and projects and efforts. So there's a lot there of great value to the community. We know, because they've approached each of us, that financially they have taken a significant hit through the pandemic and coming out the other side of it, and they have some work to do to really reestablish their base of financial support so that they can keep doing what they've done well, and to try to, as well, to try to kind of use as a launching point for maybe doing some things differently, some new things. So they have asked us for more help in the meantime. They've asked for more annual funds. Now, we can't just award annual funds to a private entity. But as you know, through the mayor's office budget, you see several categories of RFPs that we put out, and Main Streets has in the past responded to and secured money through an RFP for economic development initiatives. And so they are looking at what other municipalities and, what other municipalities do to support their Main Streets organizations. I've asked them for some data around that, and we'll be looking at that together. But really, prior to that, they are going to come forward with a proposal for, one, how they envision themselves being structured and working moving forward, and that will include how they envision their budget needing to look. They also are going to come back with really a new business plan, because, as I said, what has underpinned their budget and how they build it each year for years has taken a massive hit because of COVID. Some of their funders have not been able to participate at all with them. Others, have had to pull back, and some are looking at different priorities as a result of the pandemic. So there's a lot to sort through. I met with the director yesterday, I think it was, or the day before, and their board is going to do some work on their new business plan and what they hope to offer to the community going forward, and then come back and meet with us with a goal of getting a comfort level, because if we can get there, then I think we're always collectively the gatekeeper on public funds, right? So they've brought great value for years. We don't want to lose what they bring and what they do well. So I think the goal first is to have those conversations. They have the ability to keep going for a period of time still, but they are going to need to get a new plan together and begin to implement it in the coming fiscal year. So I think it's really kind of a to be continued conversation that we're hoping to re-engage with them before the end of June. And I think, you as counselors, obviously, you've got as much of an interest as I do in our role together. So I hope that's helpful, and we can talk more, obviously, going forward.
Sure, thank you. I just one brief follow-up question. Do you think that if the Main Streets ends up getting increased financial support from the city, that would have maybe a knock-on effect to their historic or other potential partners who have been funders for their organization?
I think a strong business plan, together with the right help from the city, could get them to a better place and get to a more sustainable place. But, we collectively want to make sure that we don't just try to put money into the breach. They've got to make their organization sustainable. We can be a part of it to the extent that we're able to offer money out through an RFP, and they're able to show that they're the right and the best organization to take those tax dollars and make a real impact for the community.
Sure, thank you. I just want to give a quick shout out to your Chief of Staff and your constituent services members of your staff. In particular, as a ward counselor, I found Ronnie Jacobson's work as a constituent services to be particularly helpful. We are part-time as in our position as counselors, and she has sort of taken the ball and run with it on a number of constituent issues, which I found very helpful, that I wouldn't have had the bandwidth and time to get to. So I just want to mention that.
I appreciate you saying that. You remember, Counselor, when we created the position in December of 2017, we all had that conversation about, it's an important position because, department heads can't get to things right away if they come in their way from constituents. We who are here all day, every day, still need that ability to have the appropriate level of staff to address concerns. And you folks who are, I think you have the hardest jobs, being elected and having constituents and still having a day job, so that a lot of your work has to be evenings and weekends. Having access to both our constituent services director as well as Ms. Ruel Kersker, the Chief of Staff, and me. I mean, having access to all of our resources and being able to try to track things down together really matters. And we've had a couple of tough ones in our ward. The ward I live in, you're my counselor, and I think you're right. I think both Ms. Jacobson and then some of our department staff have been really helpful in a couple of tough ones recently.
Yeah. I just want to also just say, if you do have any problems or issues in Ward 4, feel free to reach out to me as your ward councilor.
Always, Counselor. Just remember Foster Drive.
Councilor St. Hilaire.
Just two questions. One's just a quick one. I see the Summer Learning Initiative.
Ooh, yes. Thank you
zeroed
for
out.
flagging
Can you provide some insight onto that?
Yes, Counselor, thanks. We've seen it as important to fund that year in and year out, to show our own commitment to our program so that our donors will as well. What we've done this couple of years is we made some of the ARPA funds available through an RFP process, and the YMCA responded and secured those funds to put directly into the summer program this summer and next summer. So that will, for these couple of summers, represent the city's contribution to that effort.
So the program's not going anywhere.
No, the program is gearing up for about 130 plus kids to start July 10th. And the preparations are going real well.
Okay,
Thanks
great.
for flagging that.
Thank you. The second one is just a comment on the reserve for unforeseen. I don't know if it's the right place in the hearings to talk about that. It historically had been in the executive budget, but I see it's in a separate area now. And I guess, as you alluded to, we've supported a lot of the staff increases in the executive office. I think there've been a lot of great additions in helping us get a lot more done. The reserve for unforeseen, how do you think about that? As it relates to, free cash and other areas in the budget where we have some flexibility. How do we use that? And how do you think about budgeting for that?
Well, I'll turn most of this answer over to Mr. Ailes, but it does depend on the year as well in terms of what we're seeing for potential overruns in various areas. And so I can see he's trying to find the right page on the screen, and then he'll get on up here. But it definitely, depends on what we know coming from one year into the next and what we're forecasting for some areas that might have a mid-year need that we can anticipate.
While he is doing that, Mayor, if I may ask.
Sure.
Is the reserve for unforeseen under your purview? It's more a matter of the open meeting law to make sure that we're talking about what's been posted.
Oh, that's a good point.
It's appropriate. If you look at the budget, it's contained within the executive.
That was
We did pull it out in the digital just to give it a sense that
Yeah, you should come up here. You've got the answer. Counselor St.
Yeah,
Hilaire needs you up here.
and that was specifically my question, right? Because of the digital, it's not showing in the mayor's budget on the digital book. So I just want to make sure we're steering clear. So go ahead, and please, if you could
I think we're fine with
restate.
that. Councilor St. Hilaire, if you wouldn't mind, could you please repeat the question? I was having a technical issue. while you
I
were
guess
asking.
just, since I first started being involved in the council, the executive budget has grown, and a lot of it has been staff, and we've supported a lot of the staff hires, but the other area that's grown is in this area on the unforeseen, and I guess I'm just curious to hear a little bit more about how you think about that. There's other areas in the budget where there's flexibility built in. There's always free cash, where you guys come to us sometimes with free cash requests. What is it about this line that requires us to have $250,000 in there, and what do you use that for?
Yeah, I can tell you.
And also, where is it on here? I couldn't find it.
Yeah.
Reserve for appropriation.
If you go to department expenditures and go all the way down, it's probably in there. Is it?
I found it in the old book. I couldn't find it on the digital.
So the $250,000 in reserve for unforeseen, as you know, acts as kind of the safety valve within the budget if we need resources at some point in the year where resources aren't available. We historically, and I can't recall a year that we did not request funding of this line of $250,000. It tends to be the right amount historically, because what happens is as things pop up, it could be a match for a grant or an engineering initiative that wasn't budgeted for, or something's come out of the blue that just requires immediate need. The funds actually get transferred out of this line and into another area, and we come before the council to do that. So we're not able to spend this money just arbitrarily as we see fit as the administration. It requires your approval. The $250,000 historically has been sufficient to meet those needs. This past year, a minor exception because we had a couple major initiatives early on in the year that required us to draw this down and then replenish it. So looking back over time, we see that $250,000 tends to be just about the right amount to get us through kind of those unforeseens that pop up. That's why it's $250,000.
I see in FY '20 and FY '21, the actual in this line was 0. What is that?
So that means we used it all because we would have transferred it out. We don't expense directly to this line. We would have transferred it to other initiatives
Okay, so
with
we
the
had
council's
budgeted
approval.
more, but, yeah, okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yeah. Mr. Perry, would you like to add a little bit to this discussion?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good evening, everyone. Councilor St. Hilaire, just to add to that, all communities pretty much, this is not unusual behavior. It's important the council be aware that reserve for unforeseen, at least on a city budget, is how it's budgeted. It's pretty much historical nature. It varies from community. This one, the 250, I agree with the finance director, is appropriate nature. But even towns do this same thing. Councilor Sweeney's playing his new role there. But in a town, they have a finance committee with a reserve fund, and they use a similar, it's different because there's a different governmental structure. But bottom line to it, every community I've ever worked with, they always have something. So it is wholly appropriate. And in terms of the free cash comment you made there, if they don't spend the money, if it's not approved, it would eventually revert to free cash. It would close out on June 30th. But oftentimes, there's just things come up we can't predict, and it's good financial practice to have that kind of a line item.
Thank you.
Thank you. Council President?
Thank you. I have several questions, if that's okay.
Yes, please.
So this first one, I'm not sure if this is information, I guess, Mr. Ailes, this might be best suited for you, and you may not have this tonight, but I was curious, is there, do we keep a running total of all the grants that we receive in a fiscal year, what the total of grants comes to? And I'm just curious if you have a rough sense of what that was for the previous fiscal year?
We do, and I can ask Ms. Barrett, who couldn't be here this evening, and she typically would be, right? We can, and she's extremely thorough, as you know, so we can get you the year-to-date FY '23s from her, as well as some that are pending, if that's helpful.
That would be, I guess I just asked partially out of curiosity, partially because I do feel like we have the opportunity to be part of approving many of those grants. And so just in looking at your, the executive budget and thinking about particular investments, I just wanted to note, it's my sense that the grant director's position has been a great investment in that it has helped to bring in a large amount of funding to the city. So I was just curious if there was an amount that we knew was the total.
Yes, no, we'll get that to you, and I'll say, some of the grants that we get, we would get anyway. Okay, some of them are formulaic, or and chiefs could talk about that. In some of the public safety grants, there's a formula grant for council on aging, but even those, the administration of and the support for departmental staff that Ms. Barrett is able to provide helps us to report back. There's a lot of reporting requirements, and oftentimes keeps us in good stead for future rounds. And then there are a lot of grants that we would not get without her being as talented as she is, and as really very, very nimble in how she looks for and finds grant opportunities. A grant director who brings in $1 more than they cost makes the city money. She does a whole heck of a lot more than that. And so we will get you this year's data. It's always, I think, helpful and interesting to see.
Thank you.
Well, Mr. Ciani pointed out to me, because he's got it at his fingertips, like most things that we need information on, he's got ready. FY '22 was $5.3 million that was brought in through that, with the help of that office, as the mayor described.
Thank you, Mr. Ailes. I appreciate that, and I know, Mr. Ells, you mentioned to us early on that with the digital budget book going forward, there may be things that we'll learn during this process would be interesting. I know this is not directly part of the budget, but I can see where this would be helpful and informative for us and for the public, if that can be included in the future, so I appreciate that. And Mr. Mayor, I will affirm what you said about Ms. Barrett specifically in her role, but also a grant director is a wise investment when they can help to bring in that much money. So I know we've been affirming parts of your team, and I just wanted to offer that word of thanks for Ms. Barrett. Mr. Mayor, could I ask you a few other questions about your budget, with your permission, Mr. Chair?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Yes, please.
When we were first at the beginning of this process, and we were, as a council, we had the opportunity to ask some questions to some of the department heads that we saw at the beginning, human resources, procurement. There were questions that came about how DIB work was being integrated into their departments. And I believe you had mentioned that there is funding that sort of flows through. It may not be represented under their departments. I'm curious if you can share if part of the line that's other expenses, it looks like, or other expenditures, but it says used to support the ongoing work and implementation of recommendations from the recently completed equity audit. Is that one of the places where we would look and expect some of that cross-departmental funding would be housed here? Is that correct?
Sure, and Mr. Ailes can come up in a minute, but let me say, we have procured an additional $100,000 worth of services through the procurement process, and HR&A, the consultants who did the racial equity audit, will be working with us on a phase 1 implementation. And the good thing is that finally, we've talked about this for quite some time, they will be coming here for a special meeting on the 26th, correct, Madam President? I think,
Yes.
trying to go from memory. And so I hope anybody watching tonight is able to take the time to watch that evening. We had tried to have them come here sooner, but we needed to procure additional services, and it turned out that they were the only respondent, and so that was great. It could have been somebody else, but there's a real continuity to them being the ones. So they'll be here on the 26th to present the findings and the plan that we've put together for what things to really focus on over the coming year. Part of it is that there is a newly reconstituted core team of city staff, and we're hoping that Councilor Feldman, if that's how you want to move forward, is able to make herself available, because she was on the core team for the audit work. And with that and a number of key department staff, it'll be a 3-person chaired effort, which is kind of cool. Wangari Fahari, our new DEIB director, Ms. Teixeira, our HR director, and Mrs. Roel Kersker as chief of staff. We learned very quickly that you can't hire a diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging director and expect them to be a superhero, right? They need to be supported. They need to be supported very structurally and institutionally to make things happen. And so to have the team that's going to be leading that effort together with the consultants, I think will be really helpful. And so that, Mr. Ailes will tell you where that 100,000 is coming from. And the other piece of the racial, funding that we first identified at the level of 150,000 a few years ago is Ms. Fahari's salary, and then it's this ongoing work and next round of work on implementing the audit findings. Mr. Ailes, do you want to share the specifics?
Sure. Thank you, Mayor. So as the Mayor mentioned, we've got set aside in a purchase order for phase 2 of that work already established. So that sits over and above what's being requested in the FY24 budget. Those funds became available because of the turnover in that position. We had some savings that were realized in the salary line there. And then there was also some funds available in the in this particular line item, the diversity, equity, inclusion, other line, that combined we were able to set aside $100,000 for that work.
Thank you, Mr. Ailes. So just making sure that I'm understanding correctly, some of that $100,000 that's now in the purchase order is because of the time that the DIB position was vacant. So some of that is recaptured salary.
FY23 funds.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
And if I could also say, because I know this came up in an earlier hearing, now that Ms. Fahari's been in the job for a few months, and we're fully staffed again at this point, she and Mr. Shera are going to be going back and trying to touch base with some relationships that Mr. Shera and Mr. Toppin had started to build in the career world, right? So when Abu was here, he, Mr. Shera, Dr. Morgan, Erin Brown, the HR director in the schools, they started building relationships at some key career centers, at Suffolk, at BU, at UMass Boston, at UMass Amherst, to try to find, our way to more high quality, more diverse applicants for all of our openings. And so, as Mr. Shera said, we put our postings on job sites that we didn't used to, but there's more to it. There's working with, whether it's undergrads who are trying to get an entry-level job or mid-career professionals who are working with their grad school or undergrad school career center. We're trying to mine all of those opportunities. And so you don't necessarily see it as a line item, but it's professional time that some of our key staff will be, again, spending time trying to put some effort into building those relationships back up so that as job openings come up, we can really reach out and find great candidates.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. May I ask one more?
Yes,
Mr. Chair?
please.
Thank you. Similarly, I wondered if you could just talk about two other line items and what you envision or are thinking about them being put towards this year, if you already know. The one that I was curious about too, homelessness services. So it talks about emergency shelter or support of Beverly homeless population. I was just curious if you have thoughts about how that might be expended, and also the outreach and coordination work for residents needing critical resources.
The first is one that we have not had an application for the last couple of years. So it's available, and maybe we should talk about that because it had been in the past that Lifebridge River House had applied for that funding. They haven't in a couple of years. The other one is the other one the one that Bootstraps has applied for?
Yeah, they have an active contract for that.
Okay, so they're put out as 3-year RFPs, and are we in year 2, year 3 on that one?
I think we're in year 3.
Okay, so that funding will be paid over to Bootstraps this coming year.
The outreach line item.
Yes.
May I ask one follow-up?
Yes, please.
Just with the homelessness services, I'm just curious, I understand you were saying that's one that hasn't been necessarily applied for. I see that the 2023 projection is $16,250. I'm curious, if not applied for, what accounts for that expense in this fiscal year?
Need to see it? Is this your? Couldn't make heads or tails.
You know, it means something to me. Yeah, bear with me a second, Counselor. I'll
thank
take a
you.
look at that line.
It's page 19 in the book that you have, if that's helpful.
Yes. So what that is, as you can see, as you move from left to right, the 2023 actuals, $6,250. I believe, actually, that's a very good question. I don't know what that expenditure is, but the $10,000, the $16,250 includes a $10,000 PO for these services, and it may very well be that it is, in fact, the services we used to work with Lifebridge on, that there's a PO set up for. I can get you the detail on that. I'll just check with our procurement department in the morning.
Sure, I would appreciate that. Thank you very much. That's it, thank you.
Sure.
I am
You're welcome- you're welcome to ask more
I'm curious
questions.
why only Chief O'Connor and I earlier heard some sort of angelic choir singing, but he and I seem to be the only ones who reacted.
I heard it.
Okay. Right, we're just the only ones without a poker face, Chief, I guess.
I actually, just a brief comment to Mr. Ailes. I noticed when I was looking at the organizational chart in the digital budget book for the mayor's office, it does not include the DEIB position. And that just appears to be a correction that needs to be included. I do have a question about the
I will fix that first thing in the morning.
yeah, I do have a question about the last item. If you scroll down below that, in the narratives related to infrastructure. So it says that the executive office will continue to play a central role in shaping and executing infrastructure projects, including City Hall, McPherson Youth Center, HVAC system, library, and so forth. And I know that different parts of this, like the geothermal heat pumps, Ms. Keefe certainly is playing an integral role in that. But I guess sort of more broadly, given our conversations about management of projects with Commissioner Collins and the DPS department, it just is interesting to me that the phrase, the executive office will continue to play a central role in executing infrastructure projects, because it seems to me that while shaping those projects certainly would be the case, executing to me seems more like it really would fall in the Public Services Department as opposed to the mayor's office. I wonder if you could just sort of elaborate on the language there.
I think it's all consistent. You know, I mean, that none of these projects happen just because of one individual or one department. So, I mean, we could search for a different synonym, you know, that might be a little bit. I think that word just caught you, is your point. Yeah. No, I mean, when you think about it, I mean, I'm in the mix at the table with most of these projects. For example, the core team on some of these, on the City Hall and the library HVAC, the core teams are Commissioner Collins, Ms. Keefe, Mr. Barber, Mr. Ailes, Mr. Gelano. And then oftentimes other departments step in and step out, right? Planning, solicitor, public safety, others. So
Yeah, perhaps.
I'm almost always at the table. Ms. Keefe often, usually. Ms. Royal-Kersker will be at the table and has been on the table in some of these. So I think maybe it's just kind of stumbling on the choice of verb.
The context of the term executing, yeah. Right, because it sounds, executing to my mind as I read it, appeared to be more like project management.
Or you could say the executive office executes too.
Yeah, that is
Executives.
true. Fair enough. Okay, thank you. Thank you, I appreciate that.
Absolutely.
That clarification.
Councilor Rand? She just got
Councilor
you.
Wren.
Thanks. I want to just first share a compliment to Mayor, to your department, to your administration, and say that I think I know we all have felt the number of meetings alone that we've had in the last 2 or 3 years, but the pace at which you're managing projects and your team is taking them head on, sometimes very understaffed, and I don't know, the pace that you've been able to sustain is pretty amazing. The things that are happening in the city, we're moving in positive directions, even though, you know, we all hear criticism and you know, kind of share criticism with each other at times. It can always be more perfect, but I just want to take that opportunity to share the compliment that I think the pace that you've maintained is really kind of superhuman. And that's kudos to your staff, and I hope everybody can sleep well at night because of it. And then I also wanted to share that I guess I have a wish list for, maybe it's not in purchase of services yet, or maybe that's never gonna be the right place for it. But I think if you've been kind of paying attention to what's happening with some of the policy around people who are experiencing homelessness, communities around on the other coast, but also in New York, are really starting to change their policy and advocacy work with homeless populations. And I know, you know, through the solicitor's office, we've had there's awareness of what the policies and laws are trending towards. And I think if I had a wish list for our community going forward, it would be for your administration and this council to really come up with a plan that is progressive and unique and kind of matches the integrity with which we approach all the other massive problems that we're tackling. It's got to be one of the hardest problems that any community deals with, because it's the hardest problem a human could deal with, right? So I will not necessarily be sitting in this seat for next year's budget. Well, I know I won't be, actually. But I will be paying attention, and I hope to see some shift in our way of handling this problem together. Yeah, so that's my wish list for next year's budget. I know we all lead with compassion, so, and we've been talking about solutions and problems around this for a decade now. I you know, hope we can get to a better place, I guess. So, and then I guess, actually, most of my questions have been asked around the DEI work and kind of the other expenses and things. So I think that's all I have. Thank you.
I appreciate that, Counselor. I will say a couple points on the challenge with people who are experiencing homelessness and for the most part are outdoors, right? Is we do kind of constantly grapple with it, right? And so I appreciate your thinking on it. I do want to give a note of thanks to our own police department, particularly our community impact unit, but all our officers who really consistently work with and treat with dignity the folks who they interact with on a regular basis, who are more outdoors than anywhere else, and from time to time are really able to help them. I also want to say that we've got some great organizations in town that are working day in and day out to try to help people to a better place. You know, whether that be Lifebridge and River House or the Y or Beverly Bootstraps or Brenda Matos and her Ellis Square Friends group. There are a lot of people putting their own resources to this. So, you know, well said, and I guess we're always trying to do better. I also want to say, since you talked about our staff, we've talked about every member of our team except Martha Lewis, the Mayor's Office Executive Secretary, and I know she's watching. I don't know why she watches us. She should be doing something. She'll be on Netflix or something. But she does, and she being my Beverly High School classmate of the class of '79, I've got to say that very little would go right in our office if not for Martha. She does amazing work. She has immense capacity for staying professional and staying positive when sometimes people aren't always fully respectful and positive when they walk through the door or when she picks up the phone. So we're incredibly grateful for her every day. Just want to have said that.
Absolutely.
I don't see any other questions from the council for you, Mayor, or your staff. So thank you very much. Appreciate your joining us this evening.
Thank you all.
Next up is Mr. Foster from Emergency Management. Thank you for joining us this evening. I just want to mention that I know that the work of the volunteers who work through up at Emergency Management on special assignment to natural disasters is a great credit to you and the organizational work you do, and by extension to the city of Beverly. So thank you for that.
Well, thank you very much.
We have, because of the digital budget book, mostly the work of the department is already spelled out. So you're welcome to say a few words, but we have other departments to get to as well. So feel free to dispense with that, and we could go straight to questions as you prefer.
Okay, I noticed that Councilor Bowen isn't here, but she did put a little note about wanting to know that the question about our budget being flatlined, and actually, it looks as flatlined. this year, I did work with Mr. Ailes and Mr. Cahill to add $2,000, about 33% of an increase in our utilities, which turned out to be about a 9.4% increase in purchase services, which is pretty good compared to looking at everybody else. And the other thing was, we're fortunate to have about a 50% increase in our grants, preparedness grants, which don't really show up in this budget because they come to you as a grant that you okay during the year. So we were able to keep up with we have not suffered any substantially this year. We've actually done pretty well. Also, that was any questions she had in the budget. Anybody have any questions in the budget other than her question?
Counselor St. Hilaire?
Not a specific question about the budget, but Mr. Fowler, how long have you been in your role? You've been doing this for a while.
Excuse me?
How long have you been in your role?
Oh, about 30, 40 years, I guess.
3 or 4 years?
34?
30 or 40 years.
30 or 40 years.
If you want to do it, it was 1978 I started.
Thank you for your service, and I know it's a valuable service. And I guess my question really is around succession planning and future of your department. You know, are you thinking about that at this point, or what?
Well, as you know, I guess they are advertising to fill. So I do a dual role. I am an emergency management director. I do the cities program, and we have about a $1.2 million program that does preparedness to send people out of the state. And so the person that has decided to do both those roles, what I've talked to the mayor about doing is we're going to replace my program manager job, and I'll keep the emergency management job. So I'll be able to supervise this new person, make sure they take on the right flavor and into the job and do the right stuff. And then I was intending to do that earlier this year, but we have not been able to actually get the position approved to be posted until about 2 or 3 weeks ago. So we have a bunch of applicants looking at hiring one of those people to do the emergency, what do we call the program management for the FEMA program. And that would allow me to kind of cut back a little and still be the emergency management director, but keep my fingers in the business, so to speak.
I figured you would have a plan, so I'm glad to hear that there is one. So thank you very much.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, we wouldn't want to have an emergency in that respect, so the planning makes sense. So, are there any other questions for Mr. Foster? Council President, do you have any questions? Councilor Rand.
Thank you. I just wanted to ask if there is any, or if there are any solar panels out at Fosterville.
Oh, well, so actually, it's a funny story, is we were one of the first people, we got $1 million grant to put solar in, and the thing we'd have to do is we'd have to, well, most of that was like, it was MAPC came in, they were going to give us solar, and the solar would have to cover us for 2 weeks. That's the plan. If there's a major emergency, a facility that performs an emergency management, whether it be a hospital, whatever, has to have a 2-week plan to provide power. So what happened was, no matter what we looked at, we couldn't do 2 weeks. It's unfortunate, the only answer is to do diesel power, which I know is dirty and all that, but we don't use it that often. But so we'd have to use batteries, and the site up there to use the number of batteries we'd have to put in would be astronomical. So we did look at connecting to the solar field that's next to us, and that field really wasn't designed to do it. So the main hookup place in that field is almost on the opposite side of us. So that was a no-go. So we still haven't come up with a good way to do it. Also, we're very kind of tight on land up there. We had no land really. We'd have to put, well, if you ever see it, there's not much room to put stuff other than our current facilities. We were going to put in the solar sheds, like the roof panels, but again, the grant we got said that it had to be able to provide us with 2 weeks of electric power. We couldn't do it at the time. So We're hoping that we can come up with something eventually, but not yet.
Okay, thank you.
Sounds like a good project for Ms. Keefe. She's probably already working on it, so. Any other questions for Mr. Foster? Seeing none, pleasure to have you with us again this evening. Thank you very much.
Thank you
for your
very
service.
much.
Take care.
My pleasure.
Next up, Matt Lipinski, our Animal Control Officer. Good evening, Matt.
Good evening.
You have seen the drill, if you will, in terms of how we go through this. If you'd like to say a few words, you're welcome, or we can turn straight to questions. Up to you how you'd like to proceed.
Sure. I'll be brief because I have a 7-month-old at home waiting for me to put him to bed. So. But this is, I'm in my 9th year now with the city, 8th budget year. And time really flies when you're having fun and you're surrounded by, fantastic colleagues to assist you and just all across the city. Workload's just as busy as it's ever been. I think it came up earlier. Might have been last week or earlier this week. There's 6,000 between dogs and cats in the city, roughly 6,000, which is an astronomical number when you think about it. And there's 2 of us full time. Ideally anyway. There's 1 right now. We've been shorthanded since February, so doing the best I can to plow through. We are in the process of interviewing for that position in the coming weeks. So that looks good. And one thing I did want to mention, and you may have noticed, we have partnered in a pilot program along Lothrop Street with a company called Duty Calls when it comes to dog waste removal. I use the term pilot program. We did start at the dog park, and it worked well for the dog park. Now we've moved to Lothrop Street, specifically Dane Street Beach and Independence Park, 2 at each location. And so far, so good there. Everything seems to be going well. A few bumps, learning the system and finding, ideal locations for those containers to go, but everything seems to be smoothed out, and looking forward to the rest of the summer. With that said, I'll break for questions.
Sure. Questions from Councilor St. Hilaire or Council President? Go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Officer Lipinski, and congratulations on the 7-month-old.
Thank you.
So I just had 2 questions. One, you just alluded to that pilot program. I've seen some of those along Lothrop Street and appreciate your efforts in that regard, and I'm sure that residents do as well. You just mentioned finding ideal locations. I did happen to notice there was at least one occasion where one seemed to be knocked over, one of the stations, and I'm just curious, do you feel like they've been subject to weather or people, or is that just a matter of finding the right spot where it could really be firmly anchored?
So that instance that you mentioned, Madam President, was an isolated incident. I'm not quite sure what occurred with that, but we haven't had any other additional incidents since. We did have one container located near the parking lot at Dane Street Beach, which seemed to routinely get high use, probably very high use, to the point that it was constantly overflowing, constantly needed service, which was, it put a strain on the company that we partner with, put a strain on us a little bit to manage it. So we did move that from that location. And it seems to have alleviated that issue. And what I would say by very high use is it was attracting personal trash, not just dog waste. So by moving it away from the parking lot has seemed to have alleviated that.
Thank you. 2 follow-up questions,
Yes,
if I may.
go ahead.
One is directly related to this topic. You mentioned it's a pilot program, so I was just curious if it continues to go well. I know you and I were involved in a conversation about Bessie Baker Park, for example, and how much dog waste residents that abut the park were finding. I know when you and I sort of corresponded, that's not unique to Bessie Baker Park. Unfortunately, that's a problem in our public spaces that I know you work on public education. would this pilot program potentially roll out to other public parks and shared recreation space if it goes well?
My answer with that would be potentially. I mean, with anything comes a cost, obviously. And we also have to look at the company we're partnering with as well to make sure that they can take on the workload of additional services, because they have larger contracts as well. So I would say potentially, because I would agree we definitely have other locations that could benefit from this. Bessie Baker being one, Aubert Park being another. I think I could continue. But yes, I agree. So again, I use the term pilot program because this is truly, try it out and see what happens. And so far, so good. It seems to be progressing really well. So my hope would be that we could potentially expand at some point.
Thank you, and thank you for your efforts in that area. It's appreciated.
Absolutely.
My last question is just about, I know you are currently going to be interviewing for the second full-time position, but I'm just curious, when you had that position filled, I know you just mentioned how many domestic animals, well, cats and dogs, we have in the city. And with that position filled, did you feel like this budget and this staffing structure, was that sufficient? Were you able to keep pace with the workload, or I recognize that's still a ratio of 3,000 animals to one officer. So did you feel that there might be room for, in the future, as we can support it, that this department could stand fuller staffing, or when it's 2 full-time officers working, does that keep pace with our current animal needs, would you say?
I mean, you can always do more with more. I'll never say no to more. I think that we could benefit from more staff, but I think every department could benefit from more staff. What we have is we have 2 full-time officers who staff 70 hours a week, when it comes to a 35 per employee. If you add another employee, it would certainly allow us to cover more ground, more hours. Typical hours for calls coming in, and the chief can attest to this, is generally anywhere from 6:30 in the morning until about 8 o'clock at night. We can have a call come in, and it's sporadic. Sometimes we'll get one really late at night or really early in the morning. But the general focus of 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. with 2 officers is generally what we try and hit, at least regularly. It takes care of the majority of it, helps us keep up. But again, we're 2 people trying to cover 7 days a week, and get as much out of it as we can. And I feel that we do. I feel that we do a really good job when we're full-staffed to keep up with the workload. But you can always do more with more.
Thank you, that's helpful. And I just would say thank you for the work that you and when your department is fuller staffed, you and your team do. I know it's an interesting balance of helping to keep humans safe, but also helping to keep animals in our community safe. And so you're doing both of those jobs at once. So thank you. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
You're welcome. I wonder if you could talk, Officer Levinsky, to the challenges at the cemetery, Central Cemetery, or others as well, in terms of animal control, dogs, I suppose, especially. I know the cemeteries are supposed to be dog-free locations, but perhaps not so much in practice.
Certainly, and thank you, Mr. Chair. That actually led into a rebuttal that I just thought of for the council president. Where I would go with that is our day-to-day duties isn't just calls for service. A big thing that I brought to this department when I started back in 2014 was a patrol program. So we spend a lot of our time on the road, whether it's answering calls or visiting parks and open spaces, cemeteries, etc., and constantly patrolling and enforcing city ordinance. City ordinance being one of them, no dogs ever allowed in the cemeteries. Now, we have approximately 39 different locations that we patrol on a weekly basis. in order to patrol a spot and have it be effective in terms of, you know, a presence known, you know, being visible, as well as, you know, actual code enforcement, writing citations, et cetera. I look at approximately 30 minutes spent in one spot, at minimum. And when that comes down to it, at the end of the day, we average approximately 74 calls a month, and roughly each call can take up to an hour at least, if not more. Sometimes routine calls wind up lasting 4 hours. But generally speaking, one call is equal to 1 hour of time. Again, we're 35-hour employees, so an 8-hour day. Now that's 7 hours because we do get an hour of unpaid lunch. 4 hours of calls leaves us with 3 hours now to do additional services such as patrolling. 1 hour of that for myself goes to admin duties, such as whether it be the budget, whether it be reports, et cetera. So that leaves me personally with 2 hours. You know, again, there are days that we get no calls and the whole day spent patrolling. There's days that we're flooded and we don't get any patrols. But on that average of, you know, 74 calls a month, it leaves me with 2 hours, me personally, 2 hours to patrol, which at 30 minutes a location is 4 patrols a day out of 39 locations. So what I've tried to do is hone in and assign, you know, 1 ward per day, or, you know, 3 specific locations per day to patrol, and then anything above and beyond that will be hit in addition. The cemeteries in general are tough. Central Cemetery's difficult as well. I mean, people are there really early in the morning. They're there really late at night. Again, with 2 employees, you know, we're very reliant on overtime as well from time to time, especially during the summer. Central Cemetery, I've always found it difficult because, you know, we don't always catch people in the act, if you will, in the cemetery with a dog. But I do hear from other departments within the city, such as the cemetery department, on a frequent basis regarding their frustrations with it. And I understand it, and, you know, I share the same frustrations. The fence at the cemetery, it doesn't help me. A lot of times you know, someone will see me from across the cemetery and they sneak out the side that's not secured before I can, you know, get over to speak with them. And then by the time I get back around, they're gone. They run. They know they're in the wrong. They know they shouldn't do it, and they go off. And they get away with it, unfortunately, sometimes because we can't always catch up to them, identify them, what have you. So last year, and I think the year before, I partnered with DPW, and we put some temporary fencing around some of the breaks in the fence at Central Cemetery to try and deter people from using those breaks. And I think, I would say a week, maybe 2 weeks, and it'd be ripped down. So we'd re-secure it, and then it would last about a week. It'd get ripped down again.
If I may interrupt, what kinds of materials were used to sort of cover the?
It was temporary fencing. It was, you know, leftover construction material like the orange plastic fencing, and again, nothing solid. I think if the fence was fixed, and I understand that's a big price tag, but if the fence itself was fixed, I think that then that only allows 3 access points, if my math is correct there,
I think that's right. Yeah.
to the cemetery that are open on a daily basis, which make it easier for us in terms of people having less points of access. But it, in my opinion, might also deter some people from going into the cemetery, because I do see them go through the gaps in the fence and not necessarily through the entrances.
I can confirm, I have observed that many times myself, so.
But to answer your question, back to the patrols, we do patrol on a frequent basis. And Central Cemetery, for example, whether I've patrolled it or just driven by it, it's been every day this week. It's in a spot that, you know, if I'm going to Ward 4, Ward 2, Ward 3, just in the course of answering a call for service, you know, a lot of times it has me either driving at least the perimeter, if not through. So it is something that we patrol frequently.
Yeah, I know when you do your reports, you're very sort of data-driven with spreadsheets and so forth. Do you happen to have collected data on specifically dogs in cemeteries or dogs in Central Cemetery or something like that, or, you know, animals?
I don't have that data readily available, if that's your question.
Okay, all right, just curious. Thank you. Any other questions for Officer Lipinski? All right, thank you very much for joining us this evening. Pleasure speaking with you, and thank you for your work.
Thank you.
You bet. I think next up is our new Harbor Master, Peter Dinkman. Good evening, and welcome.
Thank you all.
You bet.
I would like to say a few words, and I promise to be brief. It's just my first time up here, so. The Harbor Master Department, it's seen a lot of changes this past year. Most notably probably is myself. And I wanted to let you know that my experience out on the water doesn't start here. I actually grew up in Beverly. I've spent a lot of time in boats out in Salem Sound, Beverly Harbor, up the river even. My first job was actually teaching sailing at the rec department. So I've been around a while. I know a lot of the people along the harbor front. I spent this past year meeting a lot of people too and reconnecting with some of those people. I've met a lot of the police department. A lot of the patrolmen actually started their careers in the Harbor Master Department. They really care about the direction of the department and it being successful. I'm working with the mayor's office, working with the Harbor Management Authority. Through all those conversations, I've really come up with a mission statement and some goals that I think really will set us in a good path, in a good direction. To do that, there'll have to be some budget changes and increases that I'm asking for, and I thought I would just touch on a couple of the highlights of those. So if you look at our staffing, thought I'd give you a little overview of how we staff the department. During the winter, we staff it during the day. We do a day shift, 8 to 4. The summer, we do a night shift as well. We're there till midnight. Other than that, we're on call. I try to staff it with 2 people at a time. It's for our own safety, and it's to be able to do an effective rescue out on a boat. It's a dynamic environment. You really need 2 people, a boat operator and somebody managing lines and whatnot. Currently, right now, we have 2 full-time people, including myself. We just filled the deputy position. We have Deputy Josh Barrett just joined us beginning of April, and his pay actually comes out of the assistant harbor master line as well. And he's an asset to the department in Beverly. He's been there 5 years. He's very talented. He's down at the Harbor Center right now rebuilding a lower unit for a outboard engine. It's a very multifaceted job. We do it all. We do a lot of our maintenance. We do search and rescue. We do law enforcement and customer service also. We do a lot down there. The increases in the assistant budget line is trying to create a higher pay. I've actually done a salary survey compared to other harbor masters in the area, and we're by far the lowest. So I'm trying to bring that up. I'm also trying to create a pay scale. So right now they all get paid the same. But what I'd like to do is retain some of our staff that have been there a while and who have the experience and training that can really teach those new staff members coming on. But right now we have, for example, a master captain with lots of experience, lots of rescue experience, and he'll get paid the same as a brand new person just coming out of high school, 18-year-old with little experience. And so I'd like to boost his pay and retain him. I wanted to talk about training a little bit too. If you look at our training line, it was zero before. So I've asked for a lot in that. We need to do training. It's actually required. For the Mass law, we're required to be a certified harbor master. For anyone that works year-round, so even a part-time assistant who works through the winter should be a certified harbor master according to the law. Right now, nobody is certified. 3 of us are in the process, including myself. 2 of us, including myself, just attended the Mass Harbor Master Association Law Enforcement Academy this past winter. We went down to the Cape and completed that training, a lot of online training as well. And that was a 240-hour course. There's a lot of other training that I still need to accomplish within this next year. It's a big investment to get a harbor master certified, and we need to have the funds to be able to do that. So going back to pay rates, we want to protect that investment too. If we're going to invest that in someone, we want to be able to retain them. The goal, there seems to be a lot of turnover in the staff. It is a stepping stone going on to police departments or fire departments. Chief O'Connor is going to get a couple of our good guys this year. They're going on to be firemen. My goal would be to have a couple staff member that are more tenured and that'll stay there, that can train the new people coming on. And so a solid crew that is consistent year to year instead of having that turnover with the entire staff. So this past year we took on 8 new staff members. We shoot for 12 usually. This year I took on a couple more just because I'm expecting even more staff to leave this year. And then some of the other line items, it's just the cost of doing business increases in the cost of doing business and maintaining an aging fleet. Some of our boats are old. For example, our what we call our underbridge boat is a small whaler. We don't have to wait till the bridge to open. We can scoot upriver and go under all the bridges. It's 1979 is the age of that boat. It's an old boat, it's waterlogged. We just pulled it out the other day to do some more work on it. We have 8 boats in our fleets. A lot of the boats we have are just backup boats because they fail a lot. And we don't want to be the ones responding to an emergency that end up needing the assistance. So I'd like to see those boats replaced, have a smaller fleet in the future, but as we maintain them, it's going to cost more to keep that old equipment going. And some of the emergency equipment we have is actually expired too, and we need to keep up with replacing. I'd like to keep up with replacing that equipment moving forward and ensuring that we have the proper training and equipment to do our job effectively. But with all that being said, I'm happy to answer any questions. I can't tell you where Schubert is, but answer questions about boats or the budget or anything on the waterfront.
Councilor St. Hilaire?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Digman. I appreciate the background on what's going on in your department. I guess just a quick question about the new waterfront restaurant. Has that had any impact on activity on the waterfront or in your department, and do you anticipate that this summer?
There's a lot of activity on the waterfront, and as you probably know, the parking is an issue down there. We're looking to utilize the docks more, and we're going to use an app called Dockwatch, so people can actually pay a fee through a smartphone or whatever and reserve a spot on the dock and go visit the restaurant for a couple hours. It's always been a 30-minute, like a drop-off tie-up at the public dock, but this will allow them to spend a couple hours or and go to the town in general. We're going to use Docwa too. We have 11 transient moorings right off the harbor center, right out front. And in the back part of the public dock, there's a U-shape. There will be spots to tie up your tender, so you could rent a mooring through Docwa and even spend the night on the mooring and bring your tender in, and tie up for free, and go to the restaurant or into town. And that'll all be managed through the Harbor Master Department.
Great, thank you.
In coordination with the Harbor Management Authority. It's a joint effort.
Cool, thank you.
Any questions?
I'm good, yeah.
Council President?
No, thank you.
I have a question about the commercial lift that's used for dropping and hoisting lobster traps in particular.
Sure.
You've talked a little bit about somewhat concerning the sort of the state of equipment that you have that really need replacement, not simply repair. I know when I first was on the council 10, 12 years ago, discussions about that hoist and its need to be replaced, or at least have shoring underneath it, were going on then. What's your opinion about the sort of the status, structural status and safety of that hoist at this point?
The hoist, it has had failures. They do have a backup mechanism for it. I don't think the hoist itself is probably a safety issue. The access to it from the boats is probably the bigger safety issue. And the Harbor Management Authority is looking at that right now, replacing some of the ladders around that. There are plans to replace that whole pier with a new hoist. I believe the Harbor Management Authority got a grant for that, and it's just been tied up for one reason or another trying to execute that.
Okay.
But it's in the works.
I'd have a follow-up question really for Mr. Ailes, I guess, on the if you could comment on Mr. Dickman's mention of boats that are really, and equipment that is really not up to par, and yet this is an emergency response position and public safety response position. I know we have programs for our police cars and for our fire equipment and so forth on a rolling basis to keep that to keep those vehicles as best we can in good operating condition. Have we had a policy in the past where we've had consistent support like that for the equipment in the Harbor Master's office?
No, historically, it probably speaks to why we've got, how many that are in kind of disrepair right now? But anyway, the historical practice has been that we could identify a grant, the former harbor master would identify the need, and hopefully those two would come together, and or an investment from the general fund to support a new purchase. For example, the pump out boat that you all just approved recently, the funding for that, a portion of it came from this particular budget, a portion came from the Harbor Management Authority, and we were able to obtain, through Mr. Dickman's efforts, a grant, and Harbor Management Authority, I think, also played a role in that, but obtain a grant to replace that boat. So that will be one that will be replaced in the near future. One thing I'm very excited about is working with Mr. Dickman. I think he provides a fresh perspective on things that, you can kind of see in some of the strategies he's looking to employ in the coming year. So we'll be gathering the totality of all the assets down there and beginning to take a comprehensive look and a comprehensive approach to professionalizing some of the aspects down there that may have required some attention.
Yeah, so I noticed that the assistant harbor master's salary, consistent with his strategy for a fresh look at retention of trained staff, certainly shows a substantial increase, which seems to make sense. Mostly, it appears there's an increase in the repair side of the budget. 0% increase for boat repairs. Maybe those two one has replaced the other in the line items. But I guess you've talked about grant funding, there doesn't appear to be appropriation funding out of the general fund. I mean, do we have a real sort of a critical need for, in the very short term, a replacement for a boat or boats in the harbor master's office?
Do you wanna?
I've actually outlined a list of needs for the harbor capital improvement needs, purchases for the department, and I've shared that with Catherine Barrett from the Grants Department and the Harbor Management Authority as well. They've been very willing to help us and support us financially with some of that. I would say our top need at the moment is a pickup truck. We are constantly towing boats, and we use our own vehicles primarily. On occasion, for our big boats, we'll get a truck from DPW, and they've been very gracious and helpful, but it takes a couple days to schedule that, and then it's taking that away from them for that period of time too. So as we shuffle boats around, as they have issues, our primary need that we would all agree on at this point is a pickup truck for the department.
Okay, but you feel comfortable that you have adequate boat equipment, if you will, boats and equipment that goes on the boats sufficient for one more fiscal year? There's no immediate urgency around replacement?
Right now, we're in the works of replacing our pump boat.
Other than the pump boat.
Yeah, our main patrol boat is a 2010. It just got repowered a couple years ago, and it's a good boat. It needs some repairs at the moment, so we have backup boats for that. And I think one step at a time. Once we get the pump boat ordered, I'll start identifying the next need and hopefully identifying a grant that can support the replacement of a pump-out boat. A patrol boat, specifically one to replace our underbridge boat to go upriver.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions from councilors? Yes, Councilor Rand.
Thank you. Mostly this is a comment. I just wanted to thank you as the new harbor master. You've really solidified a relationship with the Harbor Management Authority, and I can just, even with this budget cycle, I can see the results of that. You're kind of getting support both, for your requests and actual financial support for some of the things that you're in need of. So I think that's a great way to proceed. And I think actually together with the Harbor Management Authority, we'll get a lot of things accomplished in a smooth, quicker fashion maybe than we would otherwise. So thank you. I think you're off to a great start.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you. See no other questions from the council. Thank you, Mr. Dickman. Welcome aboard, as they say, to city staff, and pleasure to be with you to discuss this evening.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
What a nice voting welcome you gave.
Chief O'Connor. I'm afraid someone has to be last. So.
Oh, you're showing off. Is that what you're saying? Yes.
25 pages for 3 pages of budget.
Where is this in the line item budget?
I printed them at home.
Color these himself.
Looking for it.
You code within the lines. I know. I'm like, where?
Thank you very much.
I gotta look at what is online. I think we need to. I think he's gonna disguise it in here. I think this is.
We do have a digital presentation.
Anomaly.
I do promise not to go through this entire thing with you.
Line by line.
Line by line, no.
Page by page.
Really, I don't want to take up too much of your time, and I know the Clear Glove thing is making things a lot better, so really, I just want to start by saying thank you very much. I appreciate you having me. This is a lot like last year's. There's a couple things in here that I won't go through it page by page, but it just kind of gives you a heads up on the changes in call volume from year to year. And there's another map in there with the response time changes from last year to this year, which again, most of it's the same. You'll see a little bit with the bridge where we talked about where we would see a little bit of an increase, but it's still, they're under 5 minutes. So as far as my budget, actually before I go there, I just want to say first and foremost for the folks that are in this room, I appreciate all of your support. Bryant and Amit, I can't tell you how much I appreciate the fact. I actually said to Bryant today, I wonder if he cringes when he sees my phone number show up on his phone when I'm calling him, but he was gracious enough to say no, so I'm not sure I believe him. But and honestly, Maria, my admin, I can't say enough about Maria. I don't know how she does it because I know it's difficult to believe, but I'm not an easy person to work for. She does a tremendous amount, and like I said, I can't say enough about it. And a handful of people also on my staff that support Matt Hart and Jay Kryling, who some of you might know, is fantastic. Does a tremendous amount with the car seat program, fire prevention, code enforcement. So I really do appreciate that. Makes my life pretty easy. So there are probably a couple lines that jump out at you. So I'll start right out with the shift coverage line. Shift coverage line, you're going to see a pretty big jump this year. The shift coverage line is one of those things that we've been trying to nail down for a few years. We knew that it was going to go up last year. Each of the last 2 years, we've seen an increase. This is the first year in a long time that we've actually had the ladder in service, the fourth piece in service all year round. So we've been taking a look, and I can't tell you how many hours I spend looking at numbers, looking last year trying to project out what this year was going to be, and I look at months and months of data that we didn't have people, that we didn't have the truck running, and look and see how much it would cost to actually run over that period of time. That's kind of where we came up with those costs. Last year we were also hoping to get a SAFER grant, but the reality is if we look at those projections with the numbers behind, we were still looking at a little bit of a higher number than where we were at. That, like I mentioned earlier, we had to come back this year because we had some staffing issues early this year. Right out of the gate, we were down 10. Not foreseeing that this year. Unfortunately, at the end of this fiscal year, I had another spate of injuries, another military deployment, so it's been a really tight end to this fiscal year. But looking forward, we've got some stuff in place. I feel very comfortable with the numbers that you see in front of you there. But again, that number is less than we've been spending for the last 3 years by a significant amount. But I still think that with the changes that we have and with the staffing moving forward and knock on wood, keeping people healthy, it'll be right where we need to be. So.
Great. Questions from the subcommittee, Councilor St. Hilaire?
Yes, thank you, Chief. I think your team does an amazing job, and I appreciate the presentation and the detail. I like seeing the maps, and it's really helpful. I'm a visual guy, so that's helpful. A question on the training line. Looks like that's an area that's grown over the years, and if you could just elaborate on kind of what you're trying to do from a training perspective.
Sure. Training is always difficult for us. We do training. Matt Hart, my training officer, is phenomenal. He's been able to create a new training calendar. He's doing some really great things that are like competitive in nature, getting the groups, doing a pentathlon or a firefighter Olympics or whatever we like to call it. And it's great. It's great to see the guys out practicing skills and having fun doing it. But the reality is that it's very difficult to do on-duty training. If you could imagine, we're doing 15 runs a day. You look at the call volume in there, it was 5,800. It's 400 more than it was last year. It's the nature of the beast. But that means we do have to do some other training outside. Contractually, every member is allowed one 10-hour training shift, which doesn't sound like a lot. It's really not a lot. But that's one 10-hour training shift that doesn't go towards a certification. They'll do that stuff on their own because they get other money in the paycheck for it. In addition to that, this past contract, what we added was officers' meetings, which was very important to me for a bunch of different reasons. For me to get the officers into a room and communicate goals, objectives, what's new, what's not, what's next. is great. So that's another part of that. So that's where that line has jumped over the last couple of years.
I'm glad to see the emphasis. I think training, particularly in the work that you do, is definitely important.
Incredibly important.
Thank you.
Council President?
Thank you. Thank you very much, Chief. I will echo the thanks for this presentation. It's helpful to see those comparisons, especially on call times and number of calls. Could you just talk a little bit about, I know you just talked about, this is one of the first years you've had that fourth piece of equipment online and working all year. We've also talked with the grants you've gotten and over the years about staffing in the department and the needs of the department. I know fire staffing is a little bit unique because you have to staff an entire piece of equipment. Can you just share a little bit about where you see your staffing levels now? Does it feel like we've reached a comfortable goal level? Do you see more need for growth? Can you just talk a little bit about that?
I can't tell you how much more comfortable I am having the fourth piece in service. The NFPA staffing levels are something completely different. We could have a long conversation about types of buildings and the numbers that are associated, and some of those numbers are simply not attainable by us. We do it through mutual aid and other resources. Right now, we do have a grant in for 4 additional firefighters. I don't know how that's going to play out. Those grants are very, very competitive. If we were awarded those grants, what it would do is it would give us a 17th firefighter on shift if we were fully staffed. There's a bunch of different things that does for us. One of them is we know it's been proven time and time again, 4 persons on a company is a very efficient company. They move lines exponentially faster. They search areas exponentially faster. Those are the keys. But of course, what we have to look at is the community, needs of the community, and the size of the department. I can't, like I said, if you look at the last handful of fires that we've had, the difference made by having a dedicated ladder company or that 4th company on scene, because it used to be if we had a report of a fire, it was 2 pumps and a ladder, period. That was it. That's all we were running in the city, and the ladder was a quint, and so it wasn't really a ladder, it was running as an engine. Today, if we have anything that sounds anything more than a fire alarm activation, we're automatically sending the 3rd piece. So we're getting 3 pumps and a ladder straight out of the gate. So instead of folks getting to the scene, recognizing that there's an issue, and calling for that other pump that's 10, 12 minutes away in the farms, it gets crews there faster. And everything that we do is coordinated and fast. If we don't win in the first 5 minutes, we don't win. We've seen the effects of getting there and not winning that fire in the first 5 minutes, and it turns into an 8, 9, Folly Pond was a 10-hour fight. Unfortunately, we had Sherman Street the other day, was the perfect execution of firefighting. From the top down, great deputy on scene. I don't mean to single out any of my groups because they're all fantastic, but Group 3 that day just did a phenomenal job on a late notification, deep-seated fire, and they were very aggressive. We still need some mutual aid help, don't get me wrong, but again, having that additional company coming right away makes all the difference in the world. So.
Thank you very much, Chief. That's really helpful. And just a word of thanks for everything that you and your team do, but I also understand that this year, as we've been, and thanks to the mayor for this as well and his department, but expanding some of the opportunities for some of our seniors who have the opportunity to do work to help offset their property tax. I know your department was maybe one of those newer placements that was added, and so I just appreciate your support as a department in helping some of our seniors as well.
Well, thank you, Madam President. That's actually been a lot of fun. We've had Pat with us, and she's great. She works with Maria, and she's a lot of fun to have around.
Well, thank you. I appreciate your department's support for our seniors as well.
Thank you. Chief, I have 3 questions for you. You may have this more or less off the top of your head, may not. If you were to break into percentages, how many calls you get for responses to fire events versus non-fire events? It's some kind of medical emergency. How would you divide up the demands on the department?
We do about 65% medical calls. That's pretty standard it's been about the same trend over the years, about 65%. And it's about the same, it's actually a little bit lower percentage for medical than some of the departments around. So we do stay pretty busy all the way around. But yeah, about 65% of our calls are medical calls. We all of our members are EMTs. So for us, for me, it's super important that we do the same thing. Out of the gate, first on scene, good patient care. And then we're fortunate enough in Beverly that we have a great private ambulance service, so we can then hand off the patient care to the ambulance crew and send them up to the hospital and keep a truck in service that's still available to respond to other calls, fire calls, or other EMS calls.
Yeah, and that's sort of another part of the same question for me, which is what equipment goes out for those? I assume that when the call comes in, you know that it's a non-fire, that it's a medical call, not a fire call. But what equipment goes out of necessity to those non-medical calls that is actually firefighting, a big truck?
For non-medical calls?
For medical calls.
So, yeah.
In other words, how much firefighting equipment, big trucks, are going out to medical calls as opposed to, being...
So regardless, I guess you could say, of the call type, we respond in the fire apparatus. Okay. So if you could imagine, we still, even though we provide the EMS, one line of the EMS service, we're still firefighters. We're firefighters first. There's nobody else in the city that can do that part of the job. So we always take the fire trucks with us. We will go and we'll do our patient care, but we're still 3 or 4 people on that truck that are available to respond to another call as soon as we're finished with that patient care, which is super important. For years, I think what you're kind of alluding to is we ran around with a Chevy Tahoe that was a 2-person crew, and what it was intended to do was when we were only running 10, and we were only running the Quint out of headquarters, we would try to get 2 people in addition. We'd bump up to 12 sometimes, and we would just have that medical car that would run. And all it was really intended to do is take a little bit of the lean off of the Quint, the big 80,000-pound truck. But in reality, what it did was it knocked out a pump. It reduced us in our fire service capacity. It kept us from being efficient to do what we needed to do on Sherman Street, what we needed to do up at Trask Court. So ultimately, the ambulances will run with 2, but the fire department will run on one of our pieces of apparatus with a crew of a minimum of 3.
And what's typically the first apparatus from your department on medical calls that arrives?
That would be, from our department, it would be an engine. Typically, so if you can imagine, we have 3 stations, right? Yeah. In those 3 stations, we have, each station has 1 engine, and the headquarters station has an engine and a ladder. So the first truck to go out for a medical call would be the closest engine company. Down the farms, it would be engine 3. Up North Beverly, it would be engine 5. Any place downtown, it would be engine 1. We always have conflicting calls. Like I said, we have 15 calls a day. You can imagine how many are coming in sometimes that overlap. So if we have 2 calls in the downtown area, the first call for a medical would be the engine, and the second call would be for the ladder.
Okay.
We wouldn't bring an out-of-district vehicle so that the ladder wouldn't have to go out, I think.
Yeah, I mean, intuitively to me, it seems like you have a 2-man vehicle, you get out, you're going to get there, you'll get there faster than you are with a great big truck. But I trust the training, the professionalism, the expertise, and the understanding of what's the most efficient way to do it.
Yeah.
It's interesting that the most effective way to respond to a medical call is a great big piece of equipment, as opposed to a smaller vehicle just scooting right down the street.
Right, and even that bigger truck actually goes faster. I mean, we're passing the smaller vehicles that are actually traveling on the road. You know what I mean? So
yeah.
We can only go so
very
fast,
clear.
whether it's a Tahoe or a fire truck on the city streets.
Okay. Thank you. I have a couple other questions. One is, what is the status of the repairs on the central fire station? We appropriated a great deal of money, more than $1 million for that. Where does it stand right now?
That is being worked on. I know last time I spoke with Commissioner Collins, and I don't want to give you bad information because Commissioner Collins has a lot more information about it, but he had, I believe, a set of drawings that had come back from the engineering firms. He was working with them to correct a couple of things, including one was, we have an issue that, I'm not an electrician, but Where it comes to the air conditioning for the building, an insufficient electrical supply apparently, so he's working some stuff out with them to make sure that that process is still moving. But it's moving, it's just not at that point yet where we actually see the work.
Okay, all right,
So.
thank you. And then, do you have enough overtime in your budget to carry anticipated needs that way?
For fiscal '23?
Well, fiscal '24.
Fiscal '24, so fiscal '24, we've significantly jumped. You see a significant jump in fiscal '24. And again, it was a painstaking process for me to come up with that number, right? Because the last thing I want to do is come ask you for more money than I need, right? Which I think if we look at historically the last couple of years, we've had some significant things that have come up that have required us to jump that money up to over $700,000 in those years. I do not foresee some of those things happening. Like the injuries that we've had, we had one member that had to retire with cancer. He was out for a long period of time where we had an open position that was paid for. We you know, obviously, so that was a big bump on the overtime. We had 2 more members early in the year that were out with other injuries. So we can keep people healthy, then the number that you see there is what I believe is sufficient for the year.
Okay, all right.
So,
thank
but
you.
again, I can't,
Yeah, no,
you know,
predicting the future is
trying
problematic, yeah.
I'm trying to read the crystal ball.
Thank you. Other members, Councilor Rand?
Thanks. Thank you for being here and for your thorough and also pretty to look at presentation. Appreciate that. And then I noticed in your description that you speak about the men and women of the Beverly Fire Department. I'm actually just curious if we have any people who identify as women as firefighters right
Not
now.
as firefighters yet.
Okay.
It's coming.
I like the
I
yet
know it's
part.
coming.
That's
Yeah.
good.
I have worked with some tremendous women firefighters. And again, I hate to even qualify it by like that, but because it's a job that if you have the passion, it doesn't matter, right? If that's what it really comes down to. I've taught at the Fire Academy for years, and I can tell you straight up that it's right here. You either have it or you don't.
Yeah, and I think I like the yet because I know that there are probably some people out there who have it and just don't have the pathway. So I feel like that's the yet, and I'm hopeful that with this grant, maybe that's something that we can, if you get it, is there, you know, you've done a lot of work in connecting to, I think, some of the ROTC kids as they leave the high school and as they're maybe people returning from veterans services.
So one of the challenges for us is definitely recruiting people to take the civil service test. Like everything for us, because we're a civil service department, comes through civil service tests.
Right.
So when I get a list, I can hire, for every one position, I get 3 names. So the list is the list, and there are certain things that I can move around, but there's certain things, obviously, that I can't. So what I'm trying to do is encourage people to come take the test. We just had an intern at the firehouse, one of the high school interns. I wouldn't be shocked at all to see her come back and take that. I would love to see her come back and take the test and come on. I think she's aspiring for greater things, but again, I think she had a great time, and those are the things that we would like to see. We just want to entice people to come take the test and come on. And it's going to happen. It'll happen in my career.
That's a great example of opening a door and creating a pathway. So thank you for making that
But
happen.
just to be clear, as far as the men and women go, so we have fire dispatchers. I would be remiss if I didn't mention, Julie Brady up in the dispatch, and Michelle Treffry. They're 2 of our dispatchers, do a great job up there. Julie's been around for a long time, and she's very passionate about the job. And they're an integral part of our team. So.
And I would say that's kind of a similar thing. You either have it or you don't. Like I could not do that. Yeah. So I have a great respect for people who are, that's a type of first responding that takes a lot of focus and clarity, so.
Yes, it does.
Thanks.
Councilor Sweeney.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Chief, for the time that you put in this presentation. I appreciate the detail you put on staffing levels and on the need for shift coverage. You answered all of my questions ahead of time with the detail in the presentation on that. With regards to the truck that we will be paying for out of the debt service line in whole, could you maybe talk a little bit about the truck that we'll be purchasing and which engine it'll be replacing?
So what we're looking at right now is to replace engine 1. So that truck will come out of headquarters. It'll be the busiest truck, the second busiest, because there's only one company at the North Beverly station. That's the truck that moves the most. Because at headquarters, sometimes the calls split up. But it will be engine 1. So what it'll effectively do is it will take the 2014 KME pumper that's at the headquarters station and turn that into a reserve truck. And our 2006 American LaFrance is going to end up going away. That truck, our intent was to get rid of the American LaFrance when we bought the Ferrara pump. Unfortunately, when the mechanics got underneath, it was just a decision to make sure that it was the 2001 KME that went away. And that truck, actually, I can tell you, is in the Ukraine, in Kharkiv right now, and it's working. So.
Thank you, and I certainly, I know the other members of the council did as well, appreciated your taking that initiative to allow Beverly to make an impact in that way in Ukraine. One follow-up question. I know from my day job in Boxford, we've had issues with delays in receiving trucks, and there was one that we ordered in 2021 and is going to come this fall, so that's a 2-year delay. With that in mind, I don't know, have you seen anything similar, and is there any concern with the timing of the purchase of the replacement for engine 1 versus when we actually think we'll receive the truck?
Yeah, this was actually initially in my fiscal 25 capital replacement plan, but Councilor Ailes, sorry, right? Brian was good enough to, we talked about moving up for this purpose. I mean, there are manufacturers out there right now that have 3-year build-outs. So we're looking at a bunch of different ways to try to reduce that. Again, I have great people who work for me. One of the guys, Deputy Chief Petrosino is getting ready to retire. He did a lot of my maintenance stuff. Lieutenant McCormick has really jumped on that, and he has just done a tremendous amount of work for me, and this has been one of them. So he's been talking to, a bunch of manufacturers about, what are we going to be doing with this truck? The other thing is, talking a lot to Brian, has been the price of the truck. The same truck that we bought, 2 years ago for $735 is $925,000. So we're looking at measures to bring that cost down to make sure that we're being responsible and getting a truck as quickly as we can. So.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
That's it for me then.
Any other questions from the council? Seeing none. Thank you, Chief O'Connor. Appreciate having you here this evening, and as always, thank you for your work and that of the entire fire department.
Thank you very much for having me. I appreciate that. If you have anything.
Thank you. And Chief LaLasher.
I don't need fluff. And by the way, Schubert is in Delaware Bay. Thank you for having me again this year, Mr. Chairman, Mr. President, and councilors. I'll leave the questions up to you because it's obviously a complicated budget, and there are a lot of challenges we have every year.
Fine, thank you. We'll jump right into it then with questions from the subcommittee. While folks are looking at the materials, quick question, where do we stand on, Councilor St. Hilaire, go ahead.
No, you can.
Well, no, I was just going to ask quickly about where we stand on shifting to the new dispatch.
So with the contract finally being ratified, the posting should be going out this month for civilian dispatchers. And then we have to move some fire alarm equipment into the police station. So there is some hardware that has to be moved over. Chief O'Connor and I have been working on that with Commissioner Collins. So there is some work that has to be done. We then have to reach out to the state 911 commission to bring some of that equipment over and move things around in the station. So there is a build out that has to be done. The plan right now is to bring fire alarm operatives over first. They will be in the police station in their current jobs, basically. And as time goes on, hiring civilian dispatchers, training them up on the police side, and then cross-training the current fire alarm operator dispatchers, so that everybody we hire in there will be cross-trained and fully operational. So there is motion going, but there is some parts still that have to come together.
Can you put some dates prospectively on the completion of the build-out and then the moving over of the fire dispatchers?
So hopefully we're talking September, getting the hardware build, the whole build done, the 911 systems moved over. We may be able to, we're gonna start hiring some civilian dispatchers prior to that, get them trained up. Stephanie Brown, who's the dispatch civilian supervisor, will start training on the police side. Again, there is the CAD system that has to be learned, the CJIS side of it has to be learned, the FBI criminal justice system has to be learned on top of everything else. So there is some aspects to that that'll be an ongoing. Hopefully we'll get some people that have some experience in some of these certifications, which will decrease the training timeline. But hopefully hiring people almost immediately as we can, start to train them up, bring the equipment over, bring the fire alarm operators over, and then move forward. So we're hoping to get everything done, obviously this fiscal year and probably halfway through the year is our hope.
So build out hopefully by September, but the staffing just for the 2 fire dispatchers would not be until next calendar year?
No. Once the fire alarm equipment is in the police station, we can bring them into the building. We can't bring them into the building working if the equipment isn't there.
Right, so still, they could be there by this fall, shortly after the build-out?
That's the hope, yes.
I see,
Yep.
okay. All right, thank you. Councilor Hilaire?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Chief. I noted in your comments on your department overview, some comments about the opioid epidemic, and, some of the comments about your officers saving a lot of lives and how the number of calls or deaths have gone down. Can you touch on the opioid situation in Beverly and kind of how things are going?
Yeah, I mean, it's still a very serious situation. We had an overdose death just yesterday, and it's something we're continuously working with. Some of the things that are going on is the availability of Narcan is saving a lot of lives, but it's not getting people the treatment they need. Their family members can Narcan, their roommates can get Narcan. They don't call us. They don't call 911. We don't get them to do follow-ups. We don't get them to the hospitals. So this is something that we're working on with the Community Impact Unit and all of Essex County in a consortium that we have, that if there are overdoses, we can do the follow-ups with our counselors to get people into treatment. Because of the issues in the southern border and the opioids, fentanyl just flooding the country, it's an issue in the entire country right now. When we get our autopsy reports back from the state, it's, I believe, 85 to 90% of all of our overdose deaths are from fentanyl. And it's fentanyl mixed with cocaine, it's fentanyl mixed with heroin, methamphetamine, with marijuana. And this is what happens in the black market too. People sell marijuana and they lace it with fentanyl to get them hooked on the fentanyl. They don't even know that it's in the marijuana they're buying black market. And then they get hooked on the fentanyl and it's the deals are making money. So these are obviously the battles we're having now. Methamphetamine is coming up into this part of the country again. And that's because it's now cheaper than fentanyl, so methamphetamine's coming in. But what the dealers do is they mix it with the fentanyl, and we have the same cycle that's going on. It is a continuous problem we're all dealing with. And that's a national
I really
issue.
appreciate your sort of leadership on addressing it. I know it's not an easy one, but I appreciate the work all your department does and everything. But I think that issue in particular is
And as I spoke about the consortium, so what happens is in Essex County, if a Beverly resident overdoses in Gloucester, we're notified of that. And vice versa, if someone from Gloucester overdoses here, we notify Gloucester so they can do those follow-ups. And that's a county-wide effort. Newburyport to Lynn, we all do it. And, how striking this is, and I tell the story about 7-8 months ago, I'm leaving the station at the end of the day, heading home, and I come across a gentleman laid out on McKay Street. I thought it was just someone that fell. Well, it was a person who was overdosed. And gave 2 rounds of Narcan, the fire department showed up, the ambulance showed up, he was transported to the hospital. And then once he felt better, he just walked out of the hospital. Didn't want any treatment, and so he was out of Boston. So again, we notify and continue to follow up, but it is an ongoing problem.
I appreciate that update.
Thank you.
Councilor Feldman?
Thank you. It's in relation to that. So, are there any, in relation to the Narcan, do we have any programs here in Beverly that are community education programs about using and administering Narcan? I only asked because I was shocked to hear my mother at her ladies country club at 73 years old went to a Narcan workshop and was given Narcan to bring home and now knows how to administer it. And I was like, what? And I was really surprised, but it actually, my husband encountered somebody in need of that a couple of years ago in Boston. And if he would have known or had it on him, he probably would have been able to save somebody's life. And I wonder if we have any programs or if any communities in the area are having programs like this for community education.
We have had some private entities reach out to us, and Lieutenant Pangiwani's done some training, and we'll obviously do that for anybody that calls us and asks for training. We'll provide that. It's becoming more prevalent, more in private businesses, in public, the things to that effect where Narcan's available for those specific reasons. We do get a lot of calls for, say, the fast food restaurant type things where people go into the bathrooms and then they overdose. We get the calls, and again, the fire responds with us and EMS to all those calls. And it's unfortunate that these things happen, and we have to be highly trained and have the proper equipment all the time, just for these reasons.
Okay, thank you.
Council President. Councilor Sweeney.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Chief, for coming in and talking about some of the work that you guys have been undertaking. I know in this budget there is funding for an additional patrol officer, which you and I have discussed. There's certainly a need there in the department to bring staffing levels up, even just from a standpoint of coverage throughout the city. But is there any other direct impact that is worth noting that the addition of this officer will allow the department to undertake in terms of specific tasks?
Yeah, so specifically, this came about somewhat twofold. First off, again, I'll go the historically. So in 1986, and I go back and use these old numbers, in the 80s, there were 86 police officers in Beverly. When I took over in 2013, there was 65. And we're back up to 74, 75, and Mayor Cahill and the council's done a tremendous job, and we always thank you for getting those numbers back up. But a city our size should have about 80 to 85 police officers, if you look at the Commonwealth and the way that we're set up. So every year we try to get increases to make sure that we're in every ward all the time and we're patrolling. When the Hall Whitaker Bridge went down, it created another problem for us where response times and the traffic issues that arose out of that, and everyone knows about the problems on Elliott Street because of the overflow of traffic now off a bridge coming downtown. So when you get into rush hour and you have all the trains crossing Elliott, the Cummings Center, all the business, the shopping center, that is a tremendous problem. And so to have that extra officer full-time enforcing traffic, not only in Ryleside, but through the entire city. I mean, they spend a considerable amount of time there, but move on. It adds to the safety of the city, the public safety of the city.
Okay, and it's great to hear that you guys are making progress to getting that department staffing level back to what it once was. Another question I have, I know you mentioned that the city has 2 SROs, student resource officers, across 7 schools, and obviously student safety is very important, school safety, and it's certainly been a challenge across the country to try to do the best that we can to keep our students safe in that term. Do you think that there are sufficient resources within the department to keep our schools safe, generally speaking, or is this something that we really need to, as a city, be more intentional about investing in terms of school safety?
Well, again, I mean, would I like to have 4 SROs? Yes. We sometimes forget the amount of private schools in the city that we also assist with different things. The SROs are basically our juvenile detectives also. They handle all those cases also that come up throughout the city. In the summertime, they come back out and they handle community impact issues. So we have the summer day camps, we do the DARE camps, and they're assigned to those things. They're in and around the parks. So they're working with you throughout the entire year, not just the summer. So if there was a way to find funding to add more SROs, for the interaction with the kids, positive interactions we have constantly, and then the ability to provide more protection. The middle school and the high school get a majority of that protection right now, and I'd like to see more interaction in the elementary schools. A lot of the officers make appearances. They do reading programs. I've gone and done reading programs. But, you know, to be more visible in the schools, I think would be more effective. You know, and just to say, even though, you know, St. John's Prep was a swatting call that something happened which brought it to a much higher level, you know, we all responded there because of our proximity. Danvers asked for help. So when we went in there, I think I was like the fourth person to get there because I just happened to be up in that area. And the amount of resources that showed up and the professionalism and the way those students reacted, barricaded the doors correctly, locked everything up. And there was a lot of fear, obviously, and they did everything right. But to watch the office, the highly trained officers I worked with, from our department, Danvers, State Police, all the local departments around us, search that school and clear it, it just showed the importance of training, even though that turned out to be not a valid call. It was interesting to get in there and see how effective we all work together.
Thank you. Thank you for that, and certainly let us know how we can support you and the work that your officers are doing to protect our city. So
and if I may, one of the questions you asked about equipment, so we're in the same type of, having the same type of issues. The vehicles that we ordered from our 2023 budget, we're hopefully going to get in July this year. To help with the budget issues of this year, we're only buying one cruiser instead of three. Normally we buy three every year. We're only purchasing one this year. You know, that hopefully by running the fleet properly, maintaining it, making sure that cars aren't idling all the time, what that does, it's going to help us with maintenance costs. Because again, if you run an old fleet, your maintenance costs go up, and that impacts the budget. So hopefully by having 3 cars come in late and then purchasing one new one, that'll get us into 25, into 26, and then hopefully we can, you know, look forward on what type of vehicles are out there and the style of vehicles that are available.
Okay, thank you.
Councilor Rand.
Thank you. This is a detailed question that probably has very little to do with police work, but I'm always fascinated by the custodial line, and this year, in this budget, the 2023 projection is $3,000, and I know we budgeted $10,000 for that, and it's back up to $10,000 for 2024. Can you just share with me what's going on, please?
So that's kind of an issue that came up again. When we were next door, that budget, I'm sorry, City Hall's budget cleaned that building.
Right.
When we went to our own facility and went into August of 21, we only had a very short mirror. And then into 22, and now into 23, it's gone back to, you're into a building instead of 9,000 square feet, 33,000 square feet, and the need to have someone there constantly, you know, cleaning, and then bringing all 3 buildings together where when we were at the airport, the officers used to take care of a lot of that stuff, and then someone would go up there and kind of clean out. Now it's all being taken care of, so there was an increase in the need.
It's cleaning supplies and equipment. You're right. I thought that was the whole contract. You're right.
No, and that's what that is too, is because of the flooring we have, there was a cleaning machine we had to buy, and different equipment needed to be purchased because of the new building.
Thank you. That was my mistake. I was picturing it as the line where we're paying for the actual cleaning. That's my mistake. And I was wondering how could it possibly be that low for a projected 2023 amount?
Yeah, we had made a lot of purchases in 22, that now 23, it's more of a maintenance.
Okay.
Maintenance of the maintenance. Yeah, go ahead.
Counselor, if you look further up in the budget list for line 12102-52940, janitorial services.
Yep.
That's.
Got it. And that's back down this year from what that's kind of lower than what we budgeted last fiscal year. Thank you.
You'll recall we had a few prior year invoices that we had to carry forward into 23, which spiked the expenditure level. And then this is back down to the 12 months worth of a steady fee. It's a monthly fee. It's set.
Okay.
So we'll spend this exactly to the penny.
Okay, got it. Thank you. That's good.
And again, that's not a city employee, that's a subcontractor that does
Right.
that.
Thank you so much.
Council President.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Chief, for being here and answering our questions and talking about the work that you and your department do, and thank you for that work. I wonder, I guess, sort of tagging on to Councilor St. Hilaire's question, but I think it's also much broader what this position would deal with, but certainly opioid crisis would be part of it. Can you talk a little bit about the grant-funded social worker that I think we share with some other communities, and in your view, just having that one social worker position, is that sufficient to help support the work you and your officers do? Is that something you'd like to see expand in the future? I'm curious how you feel about that being supported, how well we're supporting it with our budget.
Yeah, and this is now becoming I shouldn't say it's becoming an issue, but the state grant is for $200,000 for 2 clinicians, which cover the 6 towns. One clinician covers Beverly and Ipswich, and then the other clinician covers the other communities. Those are Leahy employees, and the grant is a reimbursable grant, so they work in the police station, they work with community impact, but they are not city employees. Okay. The grant as written is a $200,000 grant, but costs are probably going to be over $200,000. So we're looking at finding ways to fund that through either the 6 cities and towns or through other means and we're also in conversations with Leahy about maybe bringing their budget down a little bit. Catherine Barrett and myself, we just had a meeting last week or the other day about this actually. We've actually had conversations with the mayor. Is this a city position? Is this something we should look at as a city position? But I know then we get into retirement and benefits, and the grant will cover it. We've talked to the Department of Mental Health, and they do say that you can use that money to cover the grant money can cover it. But if we still maintain that $200,000 grant as the grantor for the 6 cities and towns, we would have to carve out some of that other money. It can be managed, but the work that Mrs. McCarroll does is unbelievable, and she works with Cindy Baez, our domestic violence coordinator, which is a city position. At one time that was a grant position. Those grants went away, and she came on as a city employee. So that's something we're always looking to do more with. One of the things we did last year too is we made a sacrifice in one way, is that what increase we got of an officer last year, we increased community impact by an officer. So Officer Lane now works with Ms. Baez to do domestic violence follow-ups on top of the community impact work that has to be done with the homeless and the mental health issues with Officer Abrahamson and Sergeant Brown. So having that extra body has really helped us also. So it all goes back to using the resources we currently have to manage all these different missions that we have.
Thank you. Could I just ask one follow-up?
Yes, please.
Given all of that, I appreciate that answer. That's really helpful. And I'm just curious, do you feel at this point that one clinician that's available to Beverly, is that sufficient for the needs your department is seeing? Or do you think there's more need that could be met if we can think about funding it?
Again, I will, as Officer Lipinski said earlier, I will never say no to people. We have one clinician, so it's Monday through Friday days. Okay. If there were 2 clinicians, and actually, Mrs. McCarroll works evenings too and goes out with community impact. If we had a second full-time clinician, they'll be busy. I mean, there's a lot of work that goes on. There's not only the follow-ups we do with the opioid issues, the homeless issues. They help with the Section 35s to get people into treatment. Section 12s, unfortunately, with mental health crisis to get people into treatment. They're also handling on-call mental health issues that arise. So we get calls to go to residences for ongoing problems. Once that call has been de-escalated and service can be rendered, she'll be transported to the scene and start immediately working with the person that is in crisis, which is one of the greatest benefits. The whole idea is it's a jail diversion program, so that if it could be a case with someone maybe 20, 30 years ago just would have been arrested, now they're counseled, we find out what the issue is, and we try to get them a bed right away or get them some type of services.
Thank you. I definitely appreciate that, and understand, across the city we're under some constraints to try to make our budget work, especially with healthcare costs, but this is really helpful just to think about what what need there is, what you're seeing, and what could be possible in the future.
And as we talked about before, too, there are numerous calls we receive from counselors to come with them, because a lot of counselors will not enter a house by themselves. You know, they'll go to a call, but they'll call us to have an officer there because of the volatile situations that sometimes arise. So this idea of just sending a clinician to calls isn't really work because of the nature of the calls. Sometimes it can happen, but a lot of times we're going to calls, and then Mrs. McCarroll's getting involved, or Cindy's getting involved, and then working from there.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Other counselors? Counselor Corelli.
Chief, thanks for everything that your folks do, especially in Ward 3, down in Holcroft. We've had some things in the Community Impact Unit and stuff. And they have made a big impact for down there, and the residents and the kids and stuff, so I appreciate that. A couple of things I see on your budget is you're taking some hits, 57% down and 88% down, having to do with supplies for your officers, whether it's weapons, whether it's whatever they need to do to their jobs. And so my question is that sufficient?
You mean, over the last few years, we've really been able to use funding that we have to get the best of the best, is what, you know, I try to say. Last year, we were able to change out our old pistols for brand-new pistols with optics and lights, other things. So we've taken monies from years past and upgraded all our systems. So we think that right now we're in a position we can have a year where we don't have to have that type of funding to handle the job. So again, using monies from prior years, we've been able to get everything up to speed, so we're in really good shape right now.
It just got me to where, like, the last 3 years, you've been at $98,000 for that type of equipment, and then now we're down to $11,000. So that just kind of, I just wanted to make sure that you had sufficient funding to take care of your
Captain
stuff
Russo and myself and Ms. Dales went through this a lot.
Okay.
And again, because we were able to use fundings we had, unencumbered 911 money and things to that effect, we were able to get ahead of where we would normally be, so we're in really good shape there.
Okay, that's all I have. Thank you.
Chief, I have a couple of questions, one having to do with accreditation, and another one that I'm not exactly sure what question I want to ask, so maybe you can help me out a little bit. You referred to homeless issues, and we've talked about issues of fentanyl on the street. I noted that was pleased to see that you have devoted more financial resources towards training for mental health related matters. And I guess I'm sort of, the reason I'm not sure what question to ask, I guess, is because I'm really trying to figure out the intersection, if there is any, or to what degree there is, between some of these issues. So let me try to take a couple of different sort of limited questions and maybe figure out how to get where I'm trying to go. Do you see much overlap between people who are homeless and the responses you need to make for drug use?
It's hard to put into a nice little package. I mean, some of the homeless a lot of some of it's by choice. Some of it's mental health issues, some of it's addiction problems, or substance abuse problems. So again, it's a gamut of issues that have come together where, again, the shelter will only take a person who's dry, who is not under the influence. So these becomes issues in the winter. We've actually had a lot of conversations with River House, and in very inclement weather, they will actually take a person in with us, or for us rather, and we may have to have somebody there with them that may be under the influence who normally they wouldn't. So those are the challenges we're constantly working through.
If you were to describe homeless issues in Beverly sort of generally, how would you describe what those issues are?
It ebbs and flows. Our numbers go up and down. We've had some very good success getting some people into treatment and then moving into transitional housing. I think I brought up a point at maybe one of the meetings here or another meeting where the state has made some rule changes with the center. So the River House used to be transitional, where they'd go in and then they'd move them through the steps into long-term housing. Well, the state has now changed the rule without really consulting many people, where you can't now move them through. If they want to stay there, they can stay there, which now locks up positions, say, in housing. And this is a state issue, state regulation. It's something we're working with, you know, the chiefs of police associations to work with the state to find out why they, you know, changed the rule about transitioning people through the system. The whole idea of River House is they go in there, they move through housing, they get treatment, so they can function on their own and go back out to society. But when those systems are now being locked, that you can't move a person through, it's making a situation where there's few beds, now fewer beds.
Yeah, my understanding is that, I guess I've heard a lot of different assertions or theories on cause of homelessness, you know, loss of job or sort of economics, drug use, or simply mental health. My understanding is that mostly it's mental health, but perhaps it depends on the particular situation. The community impact officers are those in your department who primarily deal with homeless in Beverly, correct?
As far as trying to get them into treatment and handling day-to-day calls, yes. I mean, every officer will handle certain calls that arise. If you have somebody, you know, it happens in the morning, say at 6 a.m., someone will try to be leaving their apartment, and there'll be someone sleeping in a vestibule. They may be nervous to go by them. The cars that are working will go there and take care of that. But the ongoing issues with homeless, the community impact works with, because again, trying to get them into treatment, trying to talk them into go to the hospital, try to talk them into going to different centers and finding out what's available. That's a constant part of what they do day to day, is that type of work. And again, a lot of it is when we get into substance abuse issues, you know, we have to have so many interactions with a person before the court will place them into the system. So to give them the Section 35 through Mass General Law to move them to, say, Bridgewater, we have to have so many interactions. We have to bring them in front of a magistrate at Salem District Court, and then they'll house them, or they'll go into treatment. But it's a process that we have to go through. A lot of them refuse treatment. They refuse, you know, any type of housing. But by, you know, use of the laws in the books, we can try to get them the treatment they need.
Yeah. I mean, it's not an area that I have any particular, you know, expertise in, but I'm mindful. I'm not sure you were here yet when the mayor and Councilor Rand were discussing, you know, sort of general city policy around homeless persons here in Beverly, and developing perhaps a more intentional, broader policy approach. So I do hope that the city does move in that direction, and I'm in no position to sort of suggest exactly what that would mean necessarily, but I just want to sort of underscore and support the comments that Councilor Rand made earlier this evening on the subject.
Yeah,
So.
it's an issue that unfortunately is probably going, well, it may get worse before it gets better. I mean, the other chiefs I deal with in the largest cities have a much harder problem with it than, say, we do. I mean, Boston's issues have moved to Lowell, and then, you know, some of it could come up here, and there are issues with, you know, in New York, say, removing veterans from housing to put some homeless in housing. So there are all kinds of issues going on, again, throughout the country that could affect us at some point, and hopefully there can be resolutions to that.
Thank you. My last question really has to do with accreditation. I think, so you in your sort of statement of you know, message from you to the council, you talk about the department trying to move towards accreditation. And I think I have heard, well, for many years, the statement the department is trying to move towards accreditation. We now have a a brand-new facility with lots of resources. We have been able to get perhaps not to a full complement, but have moved towards full complement, closer to a full complement in staffing for the police department. What is it that is still needed for the police department to get to accreditation, and what are sort of the roadblocks, if any, for that?
So in 2020, when police reform came in, it kind of put a stop to a lot of the progress because a lot of the policies were rewritten. So we were in the 4th edition, they've just put us into the 6th edition. So there are about 83 policies that we've rewritten with a company and they're going into effect. And there are 154 standards that have to be followed. And so in the conversations I've had right now, we're going to try to skip certification and go right to accreditation because the building, is up to par, and our equipment and things to that effect. We should be able to go towards accreditation and hopefully get there in 23, or into 24 rather.
So you see that in the near term then?
Yes.
Achieving that. And exactly for those who may be listening, and I guess as a refresher, what exactly does accreditation mean? What does that represent?
So it's a standard set up through the Bureau of Accreditation, Massachusetts Accreditation, and it puts every single police department into the same rules and regulations, same training. Everyone acts the same way. And again, we're also a part of NEMLIC, which is the Northeast Regional Consortium. There's 65 cities and towns. So if I have to send my officers to Danvers like we did, Danvers' policies are the same as our policies. If we have to go to Salem for Halloween, our policies are the same as Salem's policy, so everyone knows what they should be doing. That's what accreditation does. It's a statewide standard.
I see. Okay. All right, I don't have any further questions. Other counselors, any questions? Oh, yes. Go ahead.
2 more things that came to mind as we were speaking. So
Please.
we're working on the solar panels for the station. Again, this is a citywide project. It's not a police project. So I think there's talk about beginning in the end of 23. Mrs. Keefe and I have had some conversations about it. So with any luck, the solar will be up and will be net zero in 24. And then a question on officers. So we have currently 6 female officers working and 3 reservists, 2 that are, 1 that's possibly going to an academy and 2 that we're getting ready to hire. So we've made tremendous strides, 9 compared to 2 when I first started. And again, I always want to thank the men and women of the department. I get to come up here and speak to the council, but they do the work day in, day out. Incredible group of individuals, a lot of young officers, a lot of turnover. And again, 24 hours a day, holidays, they're out there doing the work, and I'm very impressed with what they do every day.
Thank you. And I just want to underscore what you just mentioned. When we had the ceremony a few weeks ago, with, sort of recognizing all the new officers that came in, out of 12, 4 of them were women. And you've just, related some more figures in that respect. I think that's a terrific step forward for the department, so I'm really happy to see that. Seeing no other questions from the counselors, thank you very much, Chief. Appreciate you coming in. Good to see you again.
Madam President, thank you very much,
Thank you for
council.
your
Thank you.
service. With that, that concludes the business of the Finance and Property Subcommittee review of the budget for this evening. Our next meeting for Finance and Property Budget Review will be next Monday, June 12th. We will have Gloria Delache in for a little bit from our new Health Department Director to speak. And then we will spend the rest of the evening with Dr. Chorocek running through the public school budget. With that, I would entertain a motion to adjourn Committee of the Whole.
Moved.
Second. All those in favor? Aye. And a motion to adjourn Finance and Property.
So moved.
All those in favor? Aye. We are adjourned for the evening. And as always, thank you to BevCam.
Who's doing it?
Stellar
I think
service.
we're both gonna try and go. I'll just go right.
What they,
A lot of ground.
like what their response is,
Because I planned a public service.
You know what, like this, 7-Eleven, I talked to them.
Oh.